And one more thing, going live. We got it. Thank you. It's being live streamed.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Tribal Council of Tartaria. What's it called? I forgot
You
already.
came up with it.
Tribal Council on Tartarian Relations.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Fucking up already. You know how it goes. We got a bunch of people in the house tonight, so I'm gonna go around and let you guys introduce yourself. But I have one question for you to answer while you introduce yourself, plug your show, tell people where they can find you, and let people know who you are. And then my one question is, what is it about Tartaria that you either don't believe or having a hard time understanding? All right. And we'll start with Legit Bat. Go for it.
Oh, thanks for inviting us, dude. We appreciate it. Happy
you.
to host on Rockfin for you. For
Yeah,
anybody
man.
who isn't listening to our show, or Joe, Jen, and Ben. Ben, we're still waiting on, like usual. But we cover a lot of the same type of shit, and mostly just with fart humor. But we have a good time doing it. But. So the question on Tartaria, though, what exactly were you wanting from that?
What is
What is it that we don't believe or have a hard time understanding? And there is nothing, I don't want to speak for you, but there is nothing that I don't believe in. I believe anything is possible. I believe that we have no idea what's going on. So I am very open to anything.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Not foggy on any of the details. Like me personally, I the timeline thing, the missing 1,000 years, kind of bugs me. I don't know how much that's true or how much that isn't true, and I'm still kind of iffy on that one. So
yeah, that'd probably be the foggiest thing for me, is the exact timeline, which is also probably the hardest thing to actually nail down and prove. So I think we're all going to be foggy on that aspect, but that's why we have these talks, try to figure this shit out.
I'm not really sure if we know anything about anything, though, I guess is what I was saying. Like we hear like this was this and that was that, but who knows how it really was. So I think we're all still trying to figure things out. And this is just there's so many different stories that we have to research and dig through to figure out the real truth.
Yeah. Matt.
I'm Matt from the Great Deception podcast. I also have a show called the Monday Night Master Debaters, and it's a roundtable like this where we get together and just shoot the breeze. Yeah. I've been getting into the old world stuff now for probably about a year, and I'm with you guys. The one thing that's never made sense is the timeline. And the reason being is that things just don't seem to fit with the way the narrative goes. And the deeper we get into it, the more you start seeing these contradictions of themselves. And so the other thing, in addition to the timeline, I would say, is the technology. That's one of the things I cannot wrap my head around is, was there a use of mercury or some substance that gave them this advanced technology, or what access to technology did they have that maybe we're not aware of? And those types of things are just fascinating because, with the architecture that we see from the time, and the more we're finding out about frequencies, it's just fascinating how it all ties in. And, the one thing with Tartaria or any of this old world stuff is the more you dig into it, the more you see it's a more vast picture. And it starts encapsulating a little bit of everything in all of these aspects of life, whether it's technology, architecture, travel, trade, everything seems to be impacted or touched by this.
Excellent. Adam.
Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm Adam. I'm from the Deborah Gets Red Pilled podcast. I'm kind of switching things up with the show now, so I broke it into a few different shows. I do a conspiracy show with my friend Chud X, who should be here soon, and we've been trying to get into a bunch of this alternate timeline stuff. yeah, I guess what got me into it was just, I'd heard other people talk about it. I heard Max Egan talk about it, and I'd heard red bricks on tinfoil hat, and it was just hard to find a place to like jump in and like actually like have something that clicked in my head. And then I heard Howdy Mikowski on Crow and on Freeman Fly, and talking about the exposition buildings and coming at it from a construction standpoint. And that's where it like really clicked in my head. I build elevators for a living on big giant job sites. So that's where it clicked for me. The one thing I have trouble with is the whole red bricks. Everything's a melted building stuff. So
Okay.
I'm really excited to be here. I'm probably not going to talk too much, guys, tonight, but Michelle, it's an honor to be with you here tonight. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
All right. Andy, deep share.
What's up? Yeah, thanks for having me. I would say the most fascinating thing that got me into Tartaria was the fact that there was some story that I heard years ago about a bunch of people showing up to some public event and claiming the rights of Tartaria on American soil or something like that. I can't remember the details, and I've yet to find the article again, but that's what intrigued me the most when it started to pop up again so recently. And the one thing, I don't know, let's see, what can I not get my head around is, yeah, I would say the timeline, because I'm kind of hearing like pre-Russian history, but then I'm hearing like worldwide, international, covering the whole globe. And I know that at some point it kind of digs back into even further roots beyond that. So yeah, this is a big topic, and I'm glad we have so many people here. Michelle, honor to be here to hear what you have to say.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Randy.
Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Randy. You can find me on Instagram at random Fracts. Working on getting a pod up here soon, so mostly gonna be talks like this, just try to get to the bottom of everything, because it's just the biggest can of worms I've ever even leaned into opening, this Tartaria subject. At first I was just looking into things like Genghis Khan, and that was kind of making sense. And that whole timeline thing came up, that throws me for a loop. So I think the timeline thing, like a concrete timeline, is going to be where I just throw my hands up in the air and I have no idea. I don't know if things happened a couple hundred years ago or a couple thousand. We've been spun such a web that we live in that it's just any little piece of information that I can get that rings true, kind of has an intuitive sense. I'm definitely in the game for that. So
Excellent. Michelle Gibson.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. For me, I've been interested in alternative history and Earth's mysteries since I was a kid. I'm watching In Search of and Unsolved Mysteries, for those of you who might remember those shows. I was always fascinated by the history that we never got any information about. I'm glad I didn't major in history, because I think that probably would have messed things up for me. But I've had a genuine passion in just finding out what the truth is. And I've lived a life that's brought me into contact with a lot of information that led me down the road of researching and blogging. And I learned about sacred geometry. And I have a pretty big picture understanding of what's happened here because of the nature of my research. And I've really researched the timelines extensively. So if anybody want to talk about that tonight, we can do that from what my understanding is. I think the biggest question that I have is, something caused a liquefaction event all over the earth. I mean, the pictures are all over the internet. You just search for mud flood and you'll come up with all kinds of hits. And so I think the question is, was it a series of events? Personally, I believe they were deliberately caused. There's certainly, thoughts about the Carrington event and space weather and all that kind of stuff. But I think the people that are behind the New World Order were shovel ready for digging things out. And I think that's what was going on a lot in the 19th century. But, so for me, the question would be, what caused the mud flood? Was it one event? Was it several events? Was it directed energy weapons? Was it sound weapons? What went on there? So that would be my biggest question.
Excellent. Thank you. Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. What's up, bro?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy to be here talking about Tartaria. My family thinks I'm crazy. That's just a statement I'm going to put out there. Michelle Gibson's joined me on that show. Hi, Michelle. Nice to see you again. Randy has also joined me. What's up? So many people here have, actually. I shouldn't even go and point all the individuals out, but it's an honor to be here again to talk to all of you about such an interesting topic. I think, so much of it bothers me, not because I don't like the topic, but just because it doesn't feel very organized. That being said, that doesn't, discourage me whatsoever. I think if anything, the massive interest in the subject just shows that there's a lot of inquisitive minds, working on this task of organizing this information. I guess my biggest question, not for you guys, but for just the topic in general, is how does the free energy technology fit into the picture? Because I understand Tartaria being erased from history. I understand the communist Russian, government in their position wanting to unify the culture, wanting to erase any Muslim, anything else other than the communist mentality. And that's what, interestingly enough, sparked this whole Tartaria thing, in my opinion. It's this leaked CIA document that, out of context can lead to a lot of crazy implications, but I think within the context of what the United States, what the United Soviet Republic was trying to pull off at that time, it makes sense that they would want to rewrite history. And then, to add that into the speculative realm again, we go back to the adventures of Marco Polo. And, he wasn't just exploring China, he was exploring Russia. And like you guys all probably know, that area was called Tartaria in those days, or the Great Tartary. And we see not only Russia, but China having this communist government. I'm sure there's plenty of other places in the world that have Chinese or communist governments, but I think that, to me, is an indication of some sort of suppression. There's rumors of certain structures in China being hidden from Google Maps, and even the Beijing Wall, the Great Wall of China itself. Beijing used to be known as Peking, used to be the palace of the Kublai Khan, which, according to Marco Polo, he had an amazing palace. So, without going all the way further into this information, I guess that's where my questions are, is how does the historical record of Tartaria fit into, what we see, the more kind of extreme cases for Tartaria, specifically the high technology stuff?
We'll go to Ben. Yeah, we'll go to Ben at Legit Bat also, who just joined us. So the question is, what about Tartaria doesn't make sense to you, or what is it that you just don't believe?
It's hard to say what I don't believe when you end up having a ground shaking kind of revelation, such as anything to do with Tartaria. Once you open up your mind to the idea that any of the theories are true, and you start trying to implement that timeline that everybody's talking about, where it's not something that's readily taught, but it is out there, you can research it. Once you kind of had your head exploded that this is a possibility, it's not even that you believe that it happened or any of the theories that it happened. It's when you see it and you go, holy shit, this could fucking really, like, everything I was taught in world history was a lie. And that's when you go, oh shit, I don't know what I believe. I did start, I've kind of gone from the timeline of when a lot of the theories are out there of when it kind of ended and civilization started back up again. I think it was what 1860s, 1850s is when everybody's saying that that's around. I've been trying to collect a timeline from that point till present, rather than going back farther. What caused it? What was before that? What really interests me is the cover up. What happened after that that made them so afraid of the event that they have tried everything they could to suppress it. So when Mark, good to see you again, buddy, when he mentioned the suppression from China and how you can, and I believe Michelle already said, there's photos all over the internet of the amount of mud. When you start to see all those photos and you watch some of the documentaries, you kind of go, holy shit, why? At first, when you hear it, you don't really know what to think about it. So you kind of keep watching and okay, it's a good movie. And by the end of it, you go, oh shit. Okay, well, I need to rethink my whole life. I might need to cry and go poop and sleep. And then I will get back to you on that. That's kind of where I'm at with it. That documentary, as what is it, Whiskey, Beer, and Conspiracies told us that they were the one that sent us the link to it. There was a 5-hour documentary, and then the same gentleman did an 8-hour documentary, the lost history of flat Earth. He, as he put it, about 45 minutes in, I had to pick up my soul off the ground. And that was kind of where I was at when I finished the 5-hour, and it blew my mind. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's anything I believe. I also wouldn't say there's anything I disbelieve. And that's kind of that middle ground where I'm at with basically the world.
The safe
That's
route.
just where I'm at, man.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Chud X from Deborah Gets Red Pilled into the Apocalypse. How you doing, Chud?
Good. How's everybody doing tonight?
Good, man. So what is it about Tartaria that you have a hard problem swallowing?
Well, one that I've only ever heard really briefly touched on, that is a big question that I had fairly early in my looking at Tartaria, is particularly for North America, how Native Americans can account for some of this stuff. Were they aware of these buildings that were possibly where the World's Fairs were? Were they places that they inhabited or didn't? Were they places to stay away from? I've heard that they knew of areas that they stayed away from, but that's kind of all I've ever heard drilled in on that. And that's like my biggest question right now that I just haven't heard explored too much.
Excellent. And last but not least, the homie Romy. What's up, homie?
Hey, it's your HR representative, the homie Romy, coming at you. Tartaria breakdown, Tartaria takedown, motherfucker, you know it's gonna be a shakedown. Vibing deep into the past and pulling rabbits out of hats, esoteric at last, but not the least. We're just doing what they taught us and hath no masters and no rulers. We are a tribe and run faster, so the fat cat Vatican elitists have to play catch up. Yo. Tartaria is crazy. It changed a lot of things in my life, just similar to, it's part of a spiritual awakening, in my opinion, right? Like you get to open your mind to being basically like lied to, right, through the indoctrination and all that shit. And it's like, how much of it is real and how much of it is agregorical, right? How much of it are we creating? And that's like a crazy thing when you drop it's like the ripple effect, right? You drop the tiny seed into the water and it reaches the way to the shore. And by that point, what do we know anymore? Where was the exact focal point of that? It's interesting. But yeah, I guess for me, the muddy parts of it, and I've been, because we've been doing a whole Tartaria month on the show, Dan and I, and so like for me right now at this fucking point, I think I'm pretty well, like I agree that there's been at least I agree with Velikovsky, or not, sorry, the other Russian homie, Fomenko. Fomenko, yeah, the two Russians. Also, Russia is the way. Russia is the truth, in my opinion. We got to start looking more into what they've been suppressing, that type of history, because when it comes to the Western point of view on what this is, when somewhere that predominantly, you know, did maybe cover mainly Russia and Asia. I think there's going to be a lot more information from people and researchers from that part of the world, in my opinion, but that's okay. My opinion is exactly that. Anyways, but Fomenko taking the 1,000-year chunk out, you know, he wasn't the only great, brilliant person in academia to think that there was something wrong with the chronology, right? You also have Isaac Newton, who wrote an entire book on his issue with the current chronology. Right? These are mathematicians. You're very, very smart academic people who have an issue with the chronology that's been given to the mainstream. So that it's like, oh, it's so I really want to hopefully get some as many dates as we can as a group tonight collectively, and I got my little notepad note pen here. Hopefully get some of that there. I'll just write them down physically and we'll come up with something later, you know. But anyways, I think the murkiest waters for me would be something about the mud flood and what caused it, because you know, you got direct energy weapon, dendritic scarring, or like the electrolysis causing liquefaction. You know, Ari Asterlund goes into them being Martians, right? After the split, the golden age period, where they're looking at Saturnian cosmology. And that, so the Belikovsky said too, is that all the waters that came and caused one of the great floods was from Saturn. And so it's just, I mean, there's just an immense amount of like, what the fuck caused the many cataclysms that did happen here. And I think something else I want to get out that it's really hard for me to articulate sometimes, you know, thoughts in the head. So I've been really focusing today, doing lots of deep breathing. Hold on, here we go. Let me get another one. Sorry. That Tartaria itself, I think, you know, it's more than just the Tartarian Empire, right? It's almost like a blanket statement, and the mud flood too, of just looking at suppressed history in general, and like this very apparent, in my opinion, society, culture, empire, you know, human situation, earthen situation of people that lived in a different world of physics, a different world of understanding nature and the cosmology and the alchemical goodness that we share with Earth and the atmosphere. And like, there's been a separation of that. And that's what I think Tartarians were like. This, you know, like I said, blanket statement. It's not, I don't necessarily can't say anything for the exact specific Tartarian Empire, but what my soul tells me and what I feel deep down in my spiritual bones is that we understood the electromagnetic system of the earth and we lived cohesively with that. And then that's it for me, man, is like just trying to figure out how to get back to nature and how to get back to that ether goodness, you know, because that's where I think we'll find a lot of answers too, when you ask ourselves intuitively and tap into some sort of collective consciousness or something.
Romy, first of all, I love your face. Secondly, when it does come to that is actually one of the questions that I guess I have had the most. And I referenced it where I said, why is it that they have tried so hard to cover it up? What do you guys, because part of me thinks when it comes to that ethereal goodness that you were talking about, where you feel like we were all in tune with it and we were, I guess you could say, harnessing it. This isn't a fucking anime show, but harnessing that, using it, living communally with it, right? Do any of you think that there was a possibility of the mudslides being nature's way of fighting back from abuse?
Oof. I mean, it's a body, it's a celestial body. I would think that it has some sort of emotional play at here, you know?
It was one of the first things that I thought of, obviously, when you're talking about that connection. You talk about the spires and the domes and the arches and all of these different electrical ideas of being able to harness that, watch the water, et cetera, all of those things. Well, the first thing I thought of was, did we abuse it? And that's why they've tried to cover it up, because we went too far with it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, there are pictures, etchings, you know, how they did some of these really, really dynamic etchings is beyond me. That's another story, but of them shooting fireworks off into the sky and electrical type discharges coming out of those clouds that they're creating. So it may very well have been some kind of an induced catastrophe. I wouldn't put it past that, but yeah, so there are pictures suggesting things like that for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all I was asking. If anybody else has any info on that too, I'd
Well,
love to
I
hear
would
what you
say
say.
that, we're living in a changing universe. Any scientist who studies the earth will tell you that that things change rapidly and constantly, and some things change very slowly. And I think cataclysm is indefinitely or definitely a part of the cycle of the earth. And the way you put it maybe anthropomorphizes the earth. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but there is this sense of balance where maybe, in a situation like what we're in today with our modern world, we're pushing Gaia to the brink of its, quotient for what it can put up with. So maybe the response to bring things back into balance is a cataclysm, maybe something like a mud flood. I've seen, people make what we would say are like celestial explanations, like a planet being close to the earth could cause such a relationship energetically where there's a disturbance. Asteroids, obvious, people are aware that asteroids, meteors, things that fall from the sky can hit the planet. We have evidence for that with craters.
Absolutely.
But I think cataclysms are definitely, and I've had this thought a lot, in my life, like what's going to happen to all this plastic? That's one example. And my optimistic thought is maybe there'll be a fungus that, evolves to eat up all that plastic. And I think there's even, science articles that say that they're trying to make that happen. But either way, the fact is we live in a world where change is inevitable. And there is a balance, that's why I have the yin yang here. And I think, I've always been drawn to the yin yang. It's a very potent symbol. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with speculating that, Gaia could be basically asserting herself and causing a reset. But I think what we find when we look into the Tartarian, crop circles as well. When we look into the Tartarian theory in general, it seems to be pointing the finger at certain groups of people who are behind this reset. We see now in the modern age, right, with the whole pandemic, this is maybe a case for a great reset happening before our eyes, resetting us from what we knew as the world to maybe possibly this more integrated metaverse world.
If I could go for a second, I got a whole template of different aspects of Tartaria that I wanted to try to cover on the show.
Let's go.
So I would like to get into the first one, which is Atlantis and what's the connection there. A lot of people talk about Atlantis, being this fable city or fable civilization. And does Tartaria have any connection to Atlantis or from Atlantis, or maybe the survivors of such? I'm gonna kind of pass it around and let it go because there's so many people on the show tonight. I want everybody to have a chance to answer. So we're gonna kind of like what we did in the beginning, give like 2 or 3 minutes of your thoughts on that. If you don't have any, you can just say pass and we'll go to the next person. And then so we'll start it off with legit bad again. And Atlantis, what's the connection? Is there one?
Well, it's funny. We were actually talking about that right before the show, kind of brushing up on everything. And I don't know. It's hard to figure out how that fits in. I don't know if it was like a faction of Tartaria or if it was another word for Tartaria, or maybe it was a continent in Tartaria. Maybe it was even before that. It's hard to figure out. I mean, if you're going off of Plato's description of Atlantis, I mean, it kind of sounds like what we would think Tartaria is, at least to me. But it's hard to tell if that's just a different word for it or if it's part of it. I don't know what the connection there would be, but either way, that's gone as much as Tartaria is. You got anything, babe? Ben? Unmute.
Actually, just was listening to a podcast last night while I fell asleep about that exact thing. Was Atlantis. It was a gentleman that was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he had some pretty good evidence to believe that it was actually based in the Middle East, farther, or not farther, but southern to those northern countries like Russia.
Atlantis was?
Yes. And
I
it
think
was
part of it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So he was no. That's exactly right. He showed pictures, and it was very, very an interesting take, because he was talking about how Atlantis is supposed to supposedly have 10 kingdoms within it.
Yep.
And he believes that there are these particular spots which also correlates to the technology that Egypt showed, where he thinks that that is actually where Atlantis stemmed from. I don't know if that's true or not, but
excellent. Jen, what about you?
I don't know enough about Atlantis or Tartaria. I'm just
Okay.
interested to listen to everyone.
Okay.
I do believe that there's definitely a lost history that's being hidden from us. I don't know if anyone knows exactly, where it all came from, but it's not far-fetched to me to believe that there was Atlantis and Tartaria together and that it was hidden from us and that we started this brand new civilization with that just being a fable or, a fairy tale to us, something that, we're not supposed to believe or know about, that we're supposed to believe is fake, just so we can move forward and forget all of that history.
And Joe, Mark would like you to enable screen share. Screen share on.
Oh, I didn't know it wasn't.
And then we'll go to Matt.
Yeah, I haven't dug too deep into Atlantis, but obviously doing this stuff, you come across it all the time, and I kind of bounce back and forth as to where I stand on it. And there's times when I kind of see Atlantis being a synonym for Tartaria, and they're almost in conjunction with each other. And there's other times where I feel like Atlantis may be the predecessor to Tartaria. Again, it goes back to that whole timeline. Where does this all fall in line? And I haven't really been able to nail down Atlantis. And I, to be honest, it's not something I've dug too deep into. So I will pass the buck.
All right. Adam, you got anything?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as Jan over there. I've not looked deep enough into it to speak intelligently enough on it. But I was a couple months ago up at Chud X's house, and I was talking to some guy about Tartaria. And I thought I was being pretty clear with what I was talking about. Then Chud X sees him later in the week, and he's like, "Wow, that Adam guy sure knows a lot about Atlantis." And he's like, "Well, I thought you guys were talking about Tartaria." And he goes, What's Tartaria?" So that's my story.
Chud, you want to jump in on that too?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that was a funny miscommunication, because you guys talked for a while, and you guys were totally talking about different subjects, but I've never really thought about Atlantis with Tartaria too much. But like, as Adam points that conversation out, they are kind of interchangeable, and at least the way people talk about it. Like, Atlantis is like a small, circular, tiny version of what other people talk about Tartaria being the whole world. Because I've looked at Atlantis a lot, but not with Tartaria in mind, and haven't really looked back at it since I've been on the Tartaria wagon. I'm curious, Ben, you said you just heard someone on Rogan talking about it. Was that Jimmy Bright Insight, something like that?
Yeah, Jimmy Corsetti.
Yeah, I watched some of his videos a few years ago. He was really drilling down on Atlantis being in like northern Africa at a place that's called like the Rishat. Yeah, that structure.
Yes, that was it.
And that is interesting. I feel like it's a whole different subject than Tartaria, but it's really interesting to bring those up together and think about that. Maybe that is a way that knowledge keepers like let a little bit of truth come through. They put this vague legend out there that was told that gives us a little bit of insight to a past culture, but they make it seem like it was before the time of antiquity.
He believes that the Tartarian mudslide is actually what has caused us to never find Atlantis.
Did he talk about Tartaria?
Yeah,
on Rogan?
On Joe?
Yes.
Oh, whoa. God.
Okay, I'm gonna have to listen to that. I suppose
I'll have to find it for you guys, because that's his thing, is that he talked more than once about the idea that the Tartarian mudslide is actually why we've never found Atlantis.
Oh shit. Okay.
I know Andy and I, and possibly Roman, have some definite knowledge to add to this. But so let's go to Randy.
Yeah, so I'm kind of with Chud on the whole this is the piece of truth that we're given, in lieu of actually having any kind of understanding about what Tartaria is. So it's spun, through Greek mythology as Atlantis, right? When I'm kind of in a situation right now where I'm not too sure about Greek mythology anymore. It seems to be kind of a substitution that we were given for a lot of the myths of old, or a lot of the tales of old. So that's where I'm at with that. Yeah.
Michelle.
Thank you. Chad, I just wanted to mention, because I was thinking about the reshot structure to the Eye of the Sahara. And I would invite you all to look at Google Earth and just type in Eye of the Sahara and you'll find it. And where the Sahara is and where that part of Mauritania is, where the Eye of Sahara is, just looks like this downward mud flow. And the eye looks like what Atlantis is described as. So that has been put forth as a candidate. I personally believe that there was an ancient civilization that was advanced, and that's what the civilization is that included Atlantis, and that was actually came up to more modern times than what we're taught, which is part of the timeline confusion. There could have been a continent that sank, because it was supposed to sink in the Atlantic Ocean, and Lemuria was supposed to sink in the Pacific Ocean, but at different times. But I think there was, when they went back and they created a new history, and this is what my research is based on. If you look at the buildings, I'm going to use North America as an example because there wasn't supposed to be anything here. So all the architecture was said to have been built in our historical narrative, from the 1700s on. We're talking about big Capitol buildings. We're talking about Greco-Roman looking, court buildings. Like if you look at this Supreme Court, and I'm just throwing out some examples off the top of my head, we're taught that was all built in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. And we can't even build like that today. And so I believe that was all pre-existing. That all goes along with the World Fair thing. And I believe that this civilization was very advanced, because if you think about it, when you see pictures of the ruins of Atlantis, you'll invariably see what we would call a Greek temple or a Roman temple at the bottom of the ocean. It's typical. You see that. Well, we've got the same types of buildings on the surface of the earth, not only in North America, but all over the earth. And so that's the example that comes to mind. Is they're telling us they built these humongous buildings. And I believe this original civilization had humans that were much bigger. And that's where you get into the giant question. But I land on the side of, I think that this was a very advanced civilization that existed up until relatively recently. And then, that's the reshot structure. Thank you.
Somebody in the chat asked me to share this picture, or share a picture of the Eye of the Sahara. So I thought I'd bring it up for you while you're talking.
Yeah, perfect.
And so if you see pictures of Atlantis, it was said to have had concentric rings, an actual city of Atlantis. And so that, if you look at it again, it looks like it has rings around it and that kind of thing. And, maybe it's like a bullseye. Maybe there was a direct hit there, and that was what caused the mud flood. Or, I'm still kind of landing along the idea of a series of events, but it could have been a one-time thing. But in, answer to what you were saying earlier, Ben, I think that the earth has been abused in the last 200 years. And I'm more inclined to believe this civilization, since it was so advanced technologically, was at a much higher level of consciousness. And that what's playing out today is our beings that want to control our consciousness and keep our consciousness at a low level.
That's actually right along the theory that I was talking about. Yeah, as I feel like everybody was working in harmony as they were discovering how to harness it, and they weren't abusing it. And then once it kind of became generationally commonplace, you have those assholes that they start pushing boundaries, they start fucking with shit they shouldn't be fucking with. And the next thing you know is, as Mark said, you know, Gaia shuts it down. Nope, we're not doing this. And then the survivors went, well, we fucked up. How do we stop this from happening? Well, let's change history. Let's not mention anything about it, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I did just put that clip. It's about 15 minutes. I put it in the chat for everybody. It was only posted 2 days ago. So that's why I assume not a lot of people have found it yet. But it's only 15 minutes. So give it a listen when you get a chance.
And Mark, let's go to you, Mark.
Nice.
Yes. So Atlantis always been a very big point of curiosity for me ever since I was a little kid. I think the best evidence for Atlantis is in the work that Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock are doing. I don't think that I agree with them necessarily that aliens had much to do with the whole.
I don't think they think that either, though.
Right. Well, I think that's at least how it's sold. But either way, ancient aliens aside, we're talking about structures that defy explanation architecturally here to this day, you know, and we see, as Michelle pointed out, a lot of examples of architecture here in North America that looks very similar to, you know, things that we would consider classical structures. And who's to say that those cultures that we're remembering as Greek and Roman weren't descendants of this pre-flood culture as well? And even further so, I think what we might have is a culture that habitually takes other cultures and, like a parasite, kind of eats it from the inside out. You know, wears the dress of that culture, you know, assimilates, so to speak.
Oh, I like that.
But, you know, that aside, I wanted to share this screen share here because, well, you know what? Actually, we're talking about Atlantis, so I'll save this for later. But yeah, and then, you know, we have a bunch of interesting stuff more recently with Edgar Casey. You know, he was primarily just reading people for their health conditions and trying to figure out that. And surprisingly, a very Christian person who really only participated in using his psychic abilities because he saw it was helping so many people. I think that adds credibility to the revelations he had about Atlantis. He's not the only psychic who have received that kind of channeling. You know, we see that kind of emerge as a theme throughout theosophy, and theosophy in itself is very strange. You know, there's a lot of strange characters in that whole realm. But I think what we have is a pre-flood culture that survived through its naval abilities and then existed on the periphery of what we would call written history, because this assimilated culture that's kind of parasitically or maybe tyrannically covertly behind the scenes of power doesn't want the average person to be aware of that pre-flood significance that we human beings have, which again is why I have a lot of suspicion about the whole alien causality when it comes to these amazing structures, because we have examples of these really amazing works of architecture in the modern age. Whether or not they you know, existed for many years and were uncovered, I'm a little more skeptical about that. But I think what we can maybe see is that at least there are secret societies or groups of people who have knowledge of how to use, let's say, what we would consider otherworldly techniques to create architecture, or at least advanced techniques.
Yeah.
I think that's very plausible. So Atlantis, I think, you know, it's the fountainhead of what we would call culture, really. I think all the culture comes from that in a way, and others, maybe Lemuria is an example of some influence in other parts of the world. But as far as Europe and Africa and even South and North America, I think Atlantis is the pre-flood contender.
All right. Roman, what you got? Rashad Rollins.
Oh yeah. Yes.
bringing up Edgar Casey, right? As Mark just did, is one of the biggest predecessors to my understanding of how there's a connection. And it was basically, there was like 3 different cataclysms that he said broke up Atlantis over time, and they each had different names. And one of the 3 last islands and places of Tartaria was Aryan, the island of Aria. So, and then over many controversial, debates on this stuff over the month and everything, there's an Aryan tie to the word Tartarian, and Tartar being the, like the Tartarus, which is like the Greek word for hell, being cast at Tartarus. So like there's a bad connotation behind the word Tartar, but then you put the word Aryan in it. The Aryan people were the Tartars. They were the bad people. So Tartarian, to just kind of phonetically put those together. And then, part of the understanding of the Tartarian culture, which would have been, we're going into Hitler because it just happened. So, but I'm not trying to, but it's going to happen anyways. Fuck it. And part of the reason why they think he was looking for the Aryan nation to get their Tartarian technology and that understanding of like the Russian way of being things. And I don't want to go too deep into that.
Well,
but
without going further, you can at least acknowledge, like, during World War II, what did they destroy, right? They destroyed a lot of Paris, which if you look at some of those old photos of France, I mean, that's all what we were calling Tartarian architecture, right down to, the spires that look like they could be conductors of electricity. So it was very obvious that at least he was destroying, that kind of stuff, if at least not, keeping it for himself.
There's I was having this conversation earlier today too, not to bring in ancient alien stuff situation, but if you do tie in the Sumerian tablets and consider that there were a species of humans that could be pre-flood humans, it could have been humanoids, right? And then there was a genetic alteration to create
they were giants. I mean, we call them aliens because they don't look like us, but I mean, by all respect, they were giants. You can go to Yale's art museum and see one of the depictions of these Anunnaki, and it's huge. It's like 15 feet, and I don't think they did that by accident. They have plenty of statues to normal proportions, so I think this was intended to be to normal proportions.
Well, and there are several, actually, there's in my opinion, vast majority of ancient religions that have different names for those giants, and many of them agree on 6 fingers and 6 toes. Things of that nature.
Yeah. Rowan, did you have any more to go on there?
Mainly just the KC breakdown of like there being an Aryan nation, and he's as credible as any psychic can be for, as we'll take it to what we find value in. And if someone we believe who has done hundreds of psychic studies and healed people through psychic abilities, and he had these visions and understandings of that, then going off of Edgar Casey's work, that's the tie to Atlantis that I have an understanding of. Okay. And obviously Atlantis is a fucking huge topic.
Yeah.
It probably deserves a whole other roundtable on its own.
Probably. I'm going to kick it to Andy because I think Andy can help answer a lot of these questions. Andy.
Oh, can I? I feel like we're going to go way off track from Tartaria if we start talking about like Atlantis and stuff like that. And from my perspective, it's kind of throwing me for a loop more than it ever has before because of Box Saga. So I don't know how deep we want to get into that, but the idea of connecting what Box Saga says about the idea of Atlantis to time periods following that, it stands for Atlantis in their theory, which is all land ice, which is basically saying that it was a time period that was taking place in the northern hemisphere during the ice age. So perhaps there is a connection at some point, but it's kind of, that's my that's the only time I've really ever been deeply invested in Atlantis has been this interpretation, because it was like not what everything else is saying. So I don't know. It turned my head.
I could go deeper. So in the Box Saga, they talk about Atlantis being in the north. They also talk about 13 original ethnicities, and they break down each one of those. And they say that there's 10 tropical kingdoms, and then there's 3 Caucasian kingdoms. And the 3 Caucasian ones are Dan, Sven, and Rosette, which is Russia, the Veneer, and the Danes. So then you can get biblical too with the tribe of Dan and other biblical tribes, right? Issachar and all the other ones. And so, and you end up with this area in the north that was surrounded by ice. And you have also these 10 tropical kingdoms that were not surrounded by the ice. So when it talks about these 10 kings who came out from Atlantis to repopulate the world, it sounds very familiar to the saga also. And so these 10 kings being more of a tropical people, dark skin, not Caucasian people. And they come, if you want to go with the flood story too, of how Noah survived the flood, this could also be in relation to the fact that Noah was from Atlantis and survived Atlantis and brought his followers over. And when they landed on Mount Ararat, which is in the Middle East, they repopulated civilization from there. If you go Bach Saga, it says that Dan and Sven and Rosette, after the ice melted in 10,500 BC, those 3 came out of the ice and went down to have relations with the tropical people, tell them things, give them sciences and astrology and stuff that they have found out from being trapped in the north for so long. So there is
also we can't forget the connection. I've totally just forgot about this, that the classic setup for Atlantean city was like the round, ring cities, right?
The rings.
So of course you could say that Bach Saga perhaps like lifted that from Atlantis, but what's hard is that when you get into Bach Saga and the root language and why words mean certain things, why sounds mean certain things, why the rings were there and why they lived that way, it all has to do with one another. Like all the different parts of their life were interconnected to this language. So I don't know. It seems
but that's
more
that regions and cultures language as opposed to the entire world's understanding of language, right? At that point, because it was maybe more separated.
perhaps
Talking like dialects.
Well, just the fact that root language is kind of an anatomical language, and it's about how we name sounds after body parts and things and cycles and things like that. That's what they do in the Bach Saga. So it's a very deep connection to why those ring cities existed, the ring system existed. So it's like even like Lord of the Rings, Tolkien was obsessed with Finnish folklore
The
for
3 rings
good reason.
to rule them all.
3 rings to rule them all.
There's something too that if you tie in the kind of Bach Saga understanding, if all land is ice and Atlantis is more of a time period than it was a physical piece of land, then that's rather interesting, because if you look at Casey's or Plato's breakdown of Atlantis, and if you think about it as a time period and not a piece of land, then the 3 breakups could be 3 cataclysms that happened, or Earth growing, because I'm into expanding Earth theory. I love the fact that thinking that the Earth could be like a fruit in a cosmic tree that's just growing, torredo energy going in, creating more land inside, more water, we're growing just like a body, just like a celestial understanding of things. So, but then you have, okay, if that's the case, and Atlantis is all land is ice because of this cold ice period. Sorry, it's not the right term. Then it would be like, then the cataclysms would maybe kill off races, and they're talking about these islands being races, and would leave the 3 races, which we have. I mean, like it's interesting. That's really interesting perspective to put on Atlantis, and definitely I see what you're saying, Andy, kind of tops it on his head, bro. I mean, like, dang,
Especially with all the lore about tall Nordic looking blue-eyed
Nephilim.
gods,
Nephilim.
Quetzalcoatl. A lot of these gods have the same similar features. And I'm not trying to throw away my childhood love of aliens, but it does seem very human in a lot of ways. Humans that perhaps were thriving in a warmer part of the world because of certain atmospheric situations and geological situations in that northern region. They could have thrived more easily in subterranean caves as well. And we know what happens in all the movies and everything where, and you go, in the dark for too long, your eyes turn blue, and all the animals up there have, white fur and everything. So the rest of the planet, especially the southern hemisphere, could have been, experiencing a lot less of that at least. But the northern hemisphere was like decimated by that, except for that region in the north, perhaps. So it could explain that advanced civilization descending into the lower regions after the flood.
I'm gonna throw it out to anybody if anybody has
Michelle-
anything else
Michelle
to say
wants
about
Yes, please.
I was just about to say
Atlantis.
that.
Go ahead and go to it, and then we can get on to the next topic.
Let me just jump in here since
Yes.
it's fresh. There's two things. One is the AR. They were talking about Tartaria and the Aryan in there. And then you mentioned Ararat.
Yeah.
And what you find is that AR is all over the earth. Arizona, where I live.
Earth even has
Yeah.
AR.
It's the opposite of
Earth
raw
has
too.
AR. But I think this culture was Aryan. It was the people of Armenia. There's been talk about Armenia
Yeah.
being like the center of the earth. If
That's
you
a
look
really
at
good. That's a really good
ancient
piece
maps.
right there.
But the other point I wanted to make with what you
writing
were
that one
saying, Andy, is the Hyperborea.
Yes.
And that was a real place, but it's come
Yes.
down to us as like a legendary place. And
Right.
if you look at old maps of
As is
Hyperborea,
Atlantis.
it's like the legend is that it was like this really peaceful, wonderful, Camelot kind of place that was warm, and the people were big and lived long lives and that kind of thing. And the Nazis were super, super interested in Greenland and Thule, and had an
Agartha.
obsession with it, the Thule Society.
Mhm.
So there's something about that. And there's also something about the Channel Islands, because the Nazis spent almost the entirety of the war in the Channel Islands and in Denmark and in Norway.
All
They
the
were there like
lands.
5 years, and they were in there doing God knows what. They said they were building the Atlantic Wall in the Channel Islands, but I think they were highly interested
Wow.
Very interesting.
in that part of the world.
In the North and the South Pole, this seems like the Nazis were really interested in going to both of the poles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Holy shit.
Interesting.
Real quick
really
before we
crazy.
move on from Atlantis, is everybody familiar with the theory that the flat realm idea of we're currently in a particular spot in the zodiac and it actually oscillates the ice wall around what is a larger plane every 2,400 years?
No.
You familiar with that? Okay.
No.
So
That is
regardless
flat
of
Earth as fuck.
it is flat Earth as fuck, and it is interesting to me. And it's one of those ideas where I don't have any bearing. I don't have a dog in that fight as to whether I see it feasible or not. But it did bring up the idea. Along with Andy's breakdown of the word Atlantis, has anybody thought that maybe Atlantis, Tartaria is actually in Antarctica, and why we are no longer allowed to go there, and why there are 44 nations since 1949 that are patrolling and making sure that you can't go there unless it's on the tour to the specific spot?
I think I heard somebody say that Antarctica's name on ancient maps was like La Fuego or something similar to that. Something of the fire. And if you think of hell and the South Pole and Satan, right, going to hell.
Benjamin Ballison.
In Sumerian, it talks a lot about Enki going to the Absu, which they mention is close to the southern tip of Africa. Possibly people will say that there was a Stargate that he was able to enter or whatnot, or some way for him to get to this Absu place. But possibly that could have been Antarctica. And there was a descender from the Atlantis people in the north who was called Ra, who's associated kind of with the Satan figure. And I believe that he's the one that was the ruler of Atlantis, and his son ruled Atlantis after the fact. And they kind of, after the tragedy happened, they kind of started warring with each other and breaking apart. And he was still fighting with the main kingdom because he was hybridizing species through sex, like it talks about in Genesis 6. So there is that whole aspect to it also, and possibly there could have been a main civilization in Antarctica where they stayed, and then later it got frozen over from one of the catastrophes. Or
awesome.
Connecting this all to Tartaria, if we're going on the assumption that the Tartars were like a diaspora from a pre-flood civilization, Marco Polo's legend of Kublai Khan, it rings very similar to like a ancient palace, and they describe it with huge canals and big ditches, and it's a wonderful palace that if you look it up, Chinese culture, they'll say, oh, it's just a legend. I think there's some stories saying archaeologists may have unearthed it, adding to the mud flood premise. So I think there's definitely a cultural link, if anything, to a lot of civilizations, not just Tartary, but a lot of civilizations and this kind of pre-flood culture, and everything that entailed. I think it was much more than just architecture. There was, a lot more to it that didn't get preserved, obviously, because those things degrade. Stone and such is, some of the last remnants of those ancient times. Even, to bring the Native Americans back up again, there's a big connection between Russia and North America, but also on the East Coast where I'm at, there's a lot of connection eastward between, the Gaelic cultures, maybe even the Phoenicians and here in America. And you see certain stone structures. They're called dolmens in Ireland, but over here they're called standing stones. And it's, it's exactly the same type of stone structure. So, there's evidence for this universal nature to these sort of things. And, that could point to the pre-flood time, which Atlantis is noted for, because, everybody was more connected conceivably then when there was less water covering the planet.
And those dolmens, we did an article on RFTA about those, and there's thousands of them in and around and near the Black Sea in that region, which would be considered Tartaria.
Well, and there are so many other parallels. I know we're just jumping on Atlantis right now, but there are so many other parallels between some Native American cultural aspects and what we would call Mongolian culture.
Okay. Perfect. Anybody have any final thoughts
Mark,
on Atlantis?
Just real quick, because it's crazy you brought up Marco Polo. I was watching one of my favorite YouTube dudes called the Observation Deck. I don't know if you guys watch his stuff. Super deep researcher's been around for a while. But anyways, he did this like hour-long, documentary thing, and then he was actually calling Marco Polo out that he never went to China. And like that he kind of like fabricated a bunch of these stories about going to China and then brought back spaghetti and ice cream from China or whatever. And it was like this whole thing about an Italian
well, I think
Voyager.
that's indicative of these kind of cases where there's a cover up and there's information that they don't want people to take seriously. They go and discredit someone. And Marco Polo, on that note, when he returned to Venice, something happened politically where he ended up, living the rest of his life in jail. And that's actually how his adventures got written into a book. One of his cellmates was released and had been writing it all down, allegedly, the story goes. But I think it's important to bring that up, because if we're going to talk about Tartaria, going back to my original issue with the whole subject, I guess, where does that word first arrive in the zeitgeist? It arrives there in that part of the world at that particular time. So I think if we're going to continue using that term, we got to, kind of extrapolate from there, either forward or backwards in time, and really justify that. Otherwise, this just becomes like another catch-all term for alternative theories, which is fine, but I think it doesn't do us any justice as people who are earnestly seeking the truth. You know, if anything, it helps cover up this free energy science that I think empire, whoever it may be, always wants to cover up. They don't want people having access to free energy because you can't tax free energy. You know, you can't put a fee on it.
I think that's a solid way to wrap up the Atlantis discussion. There's definitely more that needs to be flushed out there. Apparently, we could probably do the whole rest of the show just on that topic alone. But we want to get into some of the other aspects of Tartaria here. So maybe we'll have to do this again another time. But so I guess my next question would be, when did the mud flood happen? I hear lots of different theories. Some people think maybe the Great Flood happened in 2400 BC. Some people believe the Younger Dryas flood of 10,000 BC, or that area. Some people think that it didn't happen till maybe the 1700s, maybe early 1800s, in there before the World's Fairs and everything, and they were able to come over here. So I want to hear people's idea of when they think that the actual flood happened, and how do they think that happened? What caused it? If it wasn't a flood, was it some type of solar event, some type of DEW weapon? You can get as crazy or as weird as you want. I don't really care, as long as there's some evidence to support what you want to say. Sounds good to me, huh? Anybody want to start? Matt, let's go with you.
Honestly, I think there's been multiple catastrophic events over time, obviously. So there's been multiple resets. There's the biblical Great Flood. But I think most recently, one of the things that I'm trying to look into a little bit more is the early 1800s, specifically related to the Madrid earthquake in Missouri. And that was a massive earthquake. And what caused that? You know, there's rumors of it being tied to a comet, you know, meteor strike. But it seems that has, you know, had some drastic impact on the environment afterwards, whether it was a liquefaction event, whether it was, you know, caused some sort of cataclysm. It just seems like that ties in right around that time frame of the War of 1812, right? You had the kind of World War Zero going on at that time. And that seems like everything from there till the mid 1850s is the 1850s, it appears, is where they start to dig out again some of that stuff. And I think that's what some of the World's Fairs were, where they were digging out some of the old buildings that were buried in the last mud flood. So yeah, I haven't really, and I don't nail it down to one event. I kind of look at it as multiple different events, and that there have been multiple resets over time.
Okay, Michelle, I know you can help us out a lot with this. So set us straight.
I think you're there with the dates. I go back. I think it was anywhere between 200 and 400, but I land closer to 1800, and I've come up with a theory about a time loop between 1492 and 1942, with 1717 as the midpoint year. And when I started researching 1717 onward up to the present day, there was a lot of really weird stuff. You know, just eyebrow raising kinds of things going on. And so I'm kind of like somewhere in the 1700s, but I don't think it really got ramped up until the 1800s. So I think there was a series, at least one, but perhaps a series, I'm open to it, of some kind of events. I really do believe that those folks behind the New World Order were responsible. And you know, those generational families,
the Jesuit World Order,
the Jesuits, the Masons. I think the Masonic lodges were completely infiltrated, and that's how all the architecture got, you know, reattributed to new builders everything with a date and a name and a construction company,
Mhm.
right down to the nitty gritty, everything's got an explanation for it, but it doesn't fit. So I land on, sometime 1700s, and at least with the mud flood that we're looking at.
Okay.
I do tend to look at a longer view because this civilization was so advanced and so integrated. They've destroyed much of the infrastructure. But I think that was part of the original free energy grid system. But 1700s, early 1800s, there was shovels, Ames shovel shop, digging stuff out.
All right. Adam, what's your take?
Yeah, I'm with Matt. Multiple resets. I don't know what could have caused it. I've been looking. I live in Oregon, way up in the woods, and I've been looking into the Lewis and Clark exposition of 1915. It was the expo that they had in Northwest Portland, and it was 100 years after Lewis and Clark supposedly made it to the ocean in Oregon, and they built this big, that it was big as it was a normal World's Fair. It wasn't quite as big as the Columbia Exposition, but it was pretty significant. And there's this big lake there. It was built around a lake called Gilds Lake. There's nothing down there. I went to elementary school down there. It was a bad neighborhood in the 80s. It's all gentrified now. It's all just warehouses and smart city condos now. But they had the world's largest log cabin there. Yeah, these gigantic trees as the pillars and stuff like that, it's the columns, and the lake is no longer there, and it was because they said it was filled in by a silt flood, which to me sounds like another name for a mud flood.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess later on in the show, if we get into like any of the stuff like Western expansion, I'd like to hear Michelle's take on Lewis and Clark. But as of right now, I want to know if anybody has any ideas about direct energy weapons or like some sort of crazy
we'll get to
warfare or anything like that. So
we'll get to that. Yeah. Randy.
So, as far as direct energy weapons, there's evidence to suggest that part of the means to that end is something having to do with fasces, which are, it's an icon that the ruling class uses to kind of assert their power. It's a bundle of what look like just sticks, right, with an axe in the middle. And so, done some putzing around online and looked into this a little further. This seems to be their way of extending to us that they have the means to rule based on this fasces, hence the fascist government, which is really the government we're all living under is a fascist government. I don't know why people are going so far as to call it Republican or Democrat or any of these other things, because it's just not. I don't know that the Nazis ever lost. I think Germany did. I think it's all one and the same. I think all these guys are bedfellows, whether they're Chinese or any of these others. So just based on what they've shown us that they have as far as lasers and all these atomic bombs, if you're, somebody believes in atomic weapons, some people don't, but I do lean more towards this most recent event being something that was caused just based on the fact that they had all these inheritors ready to go, right? All these babies and incubators ready to go, just ready to repopulate whatever it is that had happened. You don't develop that sort of preparation unless you've got a plan behind it, unless you've got so much invested into the game. And so, yeah, most recently, I don't think it was anything natural, but maybe there was, a flood in the past, the biblical flood.
All right. Mark, let's hear from you.
So on the point of when it happened, I think the year 1816 is a strange year, historically remembered as the year without a summer. It's also funny to note that the science of meteorology started around that time. People weren't doing that for whatever reason beforehand. There's record of, observations of different weather, usually cataclysmic weather, but for the most part, meteorology didn't really kick off until after this period. Funny, meteorology, again, I think there was some sort of not a touchdown type meteor event, but similar to, the Tunguska event, possibly, where something exploded in the atmosphere. And we also have the possibility of the what are they called? The Gulf streams in the ocean, which, have a large effect on climate all over the world. It possibly used to circle around the North Pole and then go back around under Africa, through the Indian Ocean, around Australia, and then up around the Pacific Ocean. Now it kind of does this broken double loop in between North America and Northern Europe. So I think what we see is definitely a time period where something happened energetically, atmospherically. I think some people have made the claim, again, I think I brought this up earlier, that it was possibly a planet that got very close to the Earth, and that energy had a strange effect on the planet that we've never seen before, or maybe have seen very, very long ago. Mars comes to mind. So that's where my mind's at with all that. I think the beginning of the 18th century, and then also, all of this stuff kind of connects to slavery somehow. I know the orphan trade trade and train is a topic that we might get into later on, but I think that's also notably an interesting time period. After that, slavery seems to have, been dissolved for the most part in like the late 1800s. And then you see this like influx of child labor, and then eventually, the wage system that we're all living in now, which, like Randy put it, is pretty globally fascist.
It seems like a result of the French Revolution. If anybody wants to correct me.
No, I don't even know that there was a Napoleon, to be honest with you. Sounded more like a story to me every day.
Okay. Well, I eat him with bananas, and he always sticks his hand in his shirt, so he's with a hidden hand. So
yeah, that's facts.
Maybe he was created by the Jesuits. Who knows?
And he was a short guy. You got to watch out for those fucking short guys.
It was actually not a short guy. That was all shit to just make him sound bad.
It's funny that came up because I was just listening to Walter Bosley go into the Napoleon thing, and he wrote a whole book about it. He didn't say anything there that was mentioned, but he did say that Napoleon possibly swapped identities with his brother. His brother kind of got left on his island, to be left, like I think the British planned on exiling him there. Somebody exiled him. And then he lived the rest of his life in Philadelphia, New Jersey, which is
Philadelphia.
Strange. That would make a great all movie. We know about Philadelphia.
Yeah. Of course, Philadelphia. Chud, what do you got to say?
So I've probably spent a lot more time in my life expanding the timeline than I have shrinking it. Looking at like the Graham Hancock type of way of looking at things, that things just keep getting older. That's kind of his catchphrase. And with that, like I was brought around a long time ago on thinking about different cataclysms that could have happened, like the Younger Dryas and things like that. But I think one of the things that makes Tartaria unique when you talk about it, the mud floods having happened 200 to 300 years ago is part of what that is. Because I was fully convinced before ever hearing the word Tartaria, there was an advanced civilization that existed sometime in the past that was wiped out. And I've explored that from a lot of different angles. But when Tartaria was brought into my vocabulary and on my radar and something I was thinking about, one of the hardest things to swallow at that time was that this mud flood had happened so recently. And, a series of events brought me around much closer to being able to believe it. A lot of it having to do with World's Fairs, and Howdy Mikowski really brought me into the idea that the history could be fake. And I don't really have a deep belief of a specific time that mud floods would have happened, but I think they had to have happened somewhat recently in order for the concept of Tartaria to work in my mind.
I totally agree with you because of the pictures we see of them, removing the mud from all these buildings. It had to have been relatively recent for those buildings to have been covered with mud.
Right. So when I can't even really, I couldn't give a specific year. Several of you have.
Yeah.
But more recently than the history books are telling us. That's for sure.
Does anybody have anything different than the 1800s or early 1700s, Roman? Do you,
I don't. Well, I didn't. I thought you were going to say different, but no, not an exact timeline. Just mud flood theories, but not an I think the general overarching time of the mud flood understanding in the Tartarian realm is anywhere from the early 1800s to around 1860, and then it caps off, and that's when you start seeing a lot more of the photographs. So, but I think that's the general Tartarian realm for the timeline on the mud flood.
All right, I'm gonna hit up Andy.
What's up?
What's up? When do you think the mud flood happened, man?
I think if it did happen, it was definitely in the mid 1800s, and as I don't know, I don't know why I feel so confident about it. It just seems like that whole time period's a mystery, and the orphan trains really bother me.
Seems like
that whole situation, because I think
period,
every single one of us is like, connected to this continent by how many generations? Not many. It just all goes back to that time period, and before that we don't have much information. Some of us can point to Native American roots too. Some people have Native American in them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, maybe a long time ago groups of people were aware of what happened and who caused it or what caused it or something, and they've been flatlined over time too.
All right, legit bat, all three of yous
at the same time.
Yeah.
It's the way we like it.
Yeah. Let those legit bats fly.
Giggity.
I don't have bare bars.
Sorry.
Huh?
Shut up, Annie. No, I don't know anything more about this than anyone else. It's all still to me, it's all conjecture. It's all guessing. It's all looking at pictures and trying to figure out what the best scenario would be. But we don't know anything. I've come to know that more than anything is I don't know shit. So I don't have a guess.
I definitely am leaning towards, like you said, everybody else. I think if I had to guess, I would say that it was 1840s.
Okay.
We were talking about that timeline. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Go ahead.
1840s. We've talked about, and this is that timeline in specifically. Like I said, I've looked more towards recent history from the event than previous history, because in my opinion, the previous history prior to what this mud flood might be has a whole lot more, no pun intended, covered on it that we may never know as a result of it. Whereas post that, everything that has been either found or covered is uncoverable, in my opinion, at least in some form. Whether we actually do or not, that's up for debate. But I would say 1940s, and along with Corey Hughes that we've had from Forbidden Knowledge News on, and a lot of what he's gone back to all the way to 1890, I would say that the mid 1860s, when the people start showing up in the towns, based on when I think it was Mark Twain or Charles Dickens, one of the two, several of his novels start out with mud in the streets as more than any man could move. Things of that nature that all kind of seem to line up from when it ended and when they kind of, in my opinion, all came out of their houses and said, okay, where do we start? And that's when you see the pictures start. You're talking about carts and wagons and shovels with these backdrops of just the most ridiculously ornate architecture that you have ever fucking seen. And yet previous to that is when they give you the timelines of, you know, for instance, like the first World's Fair, where they say that it was built in, you know, 7 years. But they didn't have an automatic glass maker. And it's, you know, however many football fields. And then supposedly they tore it down and moved it and set it back up. And it was curved. All of those things, in my opinion,
and then they burned it.
And then they burned it. All of those things, in my opinion, along with the orphan trains. When would the orphan trains children during the 1940s and 50s be adults? Around 1890, when they had the Zionist summit.
Yeah.
From there, you kind of go on to also where they supposedly stopped teaching flat earth in schools. All of these things all start coming about where these orphans, which in my opinion, the reason why there was an influx of it is because that's who you would save if there was room to save them from the flood. So if you have room to save the orphans from the flood, 30 years later, they're adults. They have a summit. Boom, 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 boom. Now you start laying out the history for the cover.
Well, fuck. I'm going to be the black sheep of this bit. And I'm going to say that from what I've studied with the saga, I think that the Tartarians were I guess you could say the pagans, and they were building all this architecture, and they knew of the incoming Roman Catholic Church who were spreading around, destroying every civilization and fucking them all up. And so in the Bach Saga story, it talks about how they buried all of these ancient sites because they didn't want the Romans to destroy them. And so I would kind of go with like maybe around 900 or so. And I don't know how they would bury all of these sites so quickly to hide from the Romans. But interestingly enough, in doing some research today, because I had the day off, I was looking into, you know, Tartarian stuff. And I came across this article from Inverse by Alana Spivak, and it says cosmic ray discovery both confirms and complicates Viking legend. Leif Erikson, son of Viking explorer Eric the Red, was many things, an explorer in his own right. He played a starring role in 10th century Norse geopolitics. But he was also a deeply religious man, and like so many explorers with designs on setting new lands, he wanted to bring his religion, Christianity, along for the ride. Specifically, he wanted to bring Christianity to Greenland, but ended up being the first European to set foot on American soil instead. At least that's how the story goes. And now the science goes that way too. In 1992 AD, the globe itself was in the grips of a solar storm. During the storm, high energy particles blasted from the sun with such force they entered the Earth's atmosphere and collided with atoms, landing to a spike in atmospheric carbon. The moment was so powerful, trees recorded it in their rings, leaving a radiocarbon signal for future generations to find. So that's interesting as fuck, huh?
But I'm
no, that it is science. It is a mainstream type of shit, but interesting that they
how is
say
it mud flooding?
because they said that there was a great solar storm. I'm guessing that had some type of repercussions on the planet in around 1000 AD. It's worth looking into more. I just found that article on a whim today, but it kind of does.
You definitely did go full black sheep there, yeah.
Yeah, I know. But because I'm the only
cover.
I'm the only one that thinks around the 900s is when this happened. So everybody else agrees that it's probably in the 1800s.
Well, honestly,
multiple
though,
mud floods as well.
If you look, Dan, at the whole timeline, whether it's been manipulated or not, 900 and 800 and 1800 are the same time.
I mean,
you know, so it depends what timeline you're looking at.
Could be.
How do we know we're not actually living in 1020?
Yeah.
I just said that earlier. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't think so, but I know some people do.
Lucky
That's
Dan.
cool.
All right, let me get in there with
I like to
with
be
the mud
different,
floods
but
too.
Roman, you got one more thing to say?
Yeah. Well, I want to always touch on the fact that there's a potentiality of expanding Earth, and it could be just the Earth, you know, creating more land, and then the water spread, then the oceans become more shallow, kind of like going whoosh, and then making ice caps fall in as well, and then therefore creating a hollow Earth. Sorry. But the other great thing about the Tartarian ancient technology that they had that could be a potential, and we were talking to Ari Esterlin about this, was sound weapons or cymatics, understanding of the power of frequency and being able to harness that. And so, you know, you have like you brought up, Dan, with the Bach Saga story of they had to bury these really quick because they knew that the Holy Roman Empire was coming to spread their monotheistic,
Or
New World
self-destruct
Order.
them.
Well, that's what I mean. They could have very well either had a massive amount of charge on their own end because they understood how to use this technology and they could destroy these things, or they use some sort of cymatic sound frequency to cause liquefaction on their own selves. So they could have very much so brought it on themselves, went to Agartha, hung out underneath the earth or whatever, what have you. But I think that there's a large part of that. And then there's another side point I wanted to bring up, which goes into some other stuff that people were bringing up too, is the astrological point of things, where if you really look at it philosophically and as deep and deep and deep as human spirituality wants to go, it's always to the stars, and understanding the stars, understanding it to the point that we are trying to know the way the stars move, know the way that we move within the universe. And so ancient cultures always looked at that, and that was very true to them, very true to us as humans, very true to everything that we know. Astrology plays a large part in that, in our spirituality, and that's really what we are. You know, we are spiritual creatures, and that's the beautiful point of being alive and spreading the truth. And so through that, I think they knew more about the stars, and if there was something happening on a cataclysmic level, you know, like these old Mayan calendars, it will be a destruction of this, so on and so forth. You know, they could have been talking about knowing that there's going to be cosmic flares and that causing more carbon buildup here, or causing a heat or cold flux here. So I think, you know, thinking about their spiritual belief system can also kind of help us, like, be like, they used either their ancient technology to cause a mud flood on themselves, or it was hijacked, and then the people, the Holy Roman Empire, whoever these people were in war with, because you goddamn right, it was a war, and it could have been mud war. A mud war to fucking mud flood a bunch of peoples up.
Thank you for joining my Black Sheep Matter Club.
Hell yeah.
Anybody else on mud flood or anything? No. All right, let's get into the orphan train then. So where did these orphans come from seems to be a big question. We can all agree that there was orphan trains. Interestingly, I always picture like little newsy kids with their little flat hat things, you know, the Irish little hats. And so it always makes me wonder if maybe they came from Ireland or Scotland or something. And then what were the incubators for, really? I mean, they say they're for incubating babies, but how is there so many babies being born? And then also in this is World's Fairs and what was going on with the World's Fairs, and was there indoctrination going on? And we can cover kind of all of these different things in this segment right now. And we'll go a little bit reverse on this one, and we'll start off with Andy.
Cool. I just want to take it in a wacky direction right off the bat.
Perfect.
So we have all these incredible Roman type buildings, you know, going up in these World's Fairs and everything, these old style. And when you think about it, we always compare these new parasite controllers to the old ones and saying they just kind of change business logos or something, you know. So it seems to me almost like ritualistic, like a working of some kind to then burn down these sites afterwards, these effigies for the old way of building almost. Because, you know, now all these corporations and massive conglomerates always build in 90-degree angles. That's the whole structure of today, where we've left that behind. And they like to do these kinds of things. They like to ritualize certain movements from, transition periods from the old to the new. So I just wanted to throw that in there because it's weird.
Perfect. Legit bat. Let's get it.
Beautiful.
Jen, what you got to say? I know you want to talk. I know you want to say something.
No, Joe just left. We watched that documentary with the whole orphan train in the mud floods and everything. I haven't done any research on my own. I've just seen what I've seen on it. I don't really have any sort of logical opinion on it. I have no idea. It could be aliens that are trying to repopulate. It could be
Excellent.
people that are trying to trick us. I don't know. So sorry. That's all I
Excellent.
got.
Ben?
Yes.
Superman? Super Ben.
Oh, thank you.
You wearing the Seraphim S.
Yes, that's correct. On my Under Armour. So when it comes to the orphan trains, it's actually funny because when Joe and I were growing up, we watched some of the older films about the orphan trains. And you can read outside of history books, you can read a lot of different books, like from, again, Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, and other writers of that nature, where they talk about the orphan trains. A lot of stories about orphans as a whole, like Oliver Twist, things of that nature, where they were very prevalent. And part of the documentary that Jen is referring to is this idea that they safeguarded the populace of the kids for the purpose of repopulating the earth, which is why they got sent to multiple different parts around the world. I agree with Joe that it's kind of one of those, I don't know shit, so what do we know? And that's where I've been lodged at with this entire idea and time frame. The longer I go back farther than, I would say, even to World War II and prior to that, the farther I go back, and it's not that far, the more I go, we have been lied to about everything. How do you connect dots when you don't know what the dots are? So when it comes to the orphan trains,
yeah,
what's
the
that?
dots, and the dots you do have, how do you know how to trust those dots? We had that conversation
Exactly.
with Dr. Farrell. He was talking about, like, no, I've like researched the documents. I'm like, okay, but how do you know how to believe
trust
those
the
docs?
documents?
Like, those are words printed on a paper like anything fucking else we look at. I don't know how much to trust these documents from the CIA, who we already don't trust. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's how I feel about
Well,
FOIA all the time. I'm always.
I was just about to say
bitching about
FOIA. Thank
dude.
you.
I'm
I talk
constantly
shit on
upset
FOIA
about that.
all the time.
Like,
Yeah.
seriously, we're asking permission to have information that shouldn't have been secret to begin with, but from people that shouldn't and aren't in charge of us to begin with.
Yeah, and then you get nothing but
And then-
black bars and
or you do
Yeah.
get information that sends you flying in one direction. So I don't know.
Misdirection.
Yeah. Here's
Well,
your
and-
information that you politely asked for.
So that's my thing is
Sorry.
No, you're good. I completely agree with you. Corey Hughes talks about all the time. 1947 was a huge year for the entire earth. It saw Roswell. It saw the cover up of Roswell. It saw the formation in the UN summit of the CIA and then the SOS and a bunch of these other things that from that point on, anything prior and what they wrote, in my opinion, there's the saying, history is written by the victor. And I think that we see a lot of that with what we're talking about, is the idea that the people that were left that had the knowledge, who have long since been dead, started whatever the train of thought was in those orphan trains. Think about the amount of children versus the amount of adult population that supposedly the earth had in the 1860s. I've talked about this multiple times with multiple podcasters. According to what we're told, at the turn of the century in the 1900s, we had less than 1 billion people. So you're telling me that for however long the earth has been around, it's been under that amount. But then in 120 years, we've multiplied that by 8. I don't think any of that's true. So the idea of this cataclysm happening in the mid 1800s, them safeguarding the children, and then them saying, how do we not repeat history? Well, let's go in a different direction. Let's not harness any of the energy. Let's see if we can do it by ourselves. Shit on the earth, this, that, and the other. I think that the orphan trains were completely real. And I think that they had a purpose of repopulating the earth.
Okay. Let's go to Into the Apocalypse. Adam and Chud, what do you guys got to say?
So I got a good little short story here of as I first heard of Tartaria and was trying to wrap my head around it. Like a lot of people, a big response I had was, well, how could this have happened so recently? I live on family property that's been in my family for a long time. I'm in a basement that my great-grandfather had built right now. And that was in 1906. And how could this man, who I never met, but I'm pretty close to, I knew my grandfather, his son, very well. Like, wouldn't there be some residual talk of this that would have happened just before him? But I look back one step further at his father, my great-great-grandfather, who had land really close to here. And this was kind of a breakthrough moment for me as I went, well, what information do I have? I have this old book of farmers from this local area, and it's got a paragraph on my great-great-grandfather Gottlieb. And I look it up, and he lived happily in Germany until 1865, when both of his parents died on the same day and he was orphaned. And I went, oh shit. There's, he was
it's one of those tangible stories from somebody that I'm talking to live that I'm like, see, you motherfuckers. Sorry, go ahead.
There's instances of this. And he wasn't, I don't think we can say orphan trained, because apparently he was then educated by the state, where he was, while going to school, also worked in a sugar factory until he was 18, and he'd saved enough money to buy land, which he then sold and then moved over to the United States. But I mean, it was one of those, like, I had to put on the brakes, because I went, oh shit, I come from an orphan from 1865 of all the times, like it's just right there. So I mean, and then I have to ask myself, all the information I have, the only information I'm ever going to have is that both his parents died on the same day. That sentence, nothing more. How did they die? Did they die? Did they sell him? Were they offered something they couldn't refuse? Was he just taken? Did he have a prehistory to that? I mean, just none of this will ever be answered, but just the fact that he was orphaned in Germany at that time. I mean, it's talk about some red flags right there,
Adam.
Yeah, I'm under the same kind of thing as Chud there. Like I know about my grandma. I don't know about her parents. My grandma went to Ellis Island by herself in 1907. And I don't, she apparently went and met up with her family in California after that. That's about all I know. The stuff that I find the most interesting, I guess the question that comes up for me is, how did, if we're supposing that all these orphans came about because their parents died from a cataclysmic mud flood, why did the children survive? I'm sure there's way more that I'm missing in that whole story, but the stuff about Australia and children being shipped from Ireland and Scotland to Australia, that's really interesting to me. And then the whole fact that I've heard Max Egan talk about it, and he says that there's like distinct physical features that Australian people have too, that they're not just English people, that there was actually like white people in Australia before, but that's kind of getting off topic. But yeah, I guess I just want to know, what the explanation is for why all the kids survived and why parents died. And then I was listening to Matt's podcast recently with Old Scary World, and that was such a good show episode, Matt. I really, really enjoyed it. And that guy's on some next level shit with go watch his YouTube channel, because it's like really well done. It's all super creepy and stuff. But he's from the Bay Area. I lived there for a long time, and there's this town called Colma. It's just south of San Francisco. It's a really shitty place. There's like a Home Depot there, and then the rest of the town is a graveyard. And he gives this stat out too. There's more dead people there than there are alive people. And he said he went and looked through these gigantic cemeteries, and it's like the section of all the people who have died supposedly from the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, and none of the gravestones have anybody whose birth date predates 1860. So yeah, makes you wonder. So I'll stop it there.
Let's go to Randy.
Yeah, dude, it's where did all the babies and children come from?
Yeah,
maybe not
that's the
so much
question.
just the orphans, but
really busy
the
dudes.
incubator baby thing throws me for a loop. So I couldn't say, it's all speculation, but I don't know if they were cloned people or stolen children or what could be going on there. But it's is that what they're doing with us now with all these experimental jabs and all this other stuff, getting rid of all the older folks?
I was just gonna go there.
Could be, it's scary. It's scary to have that thought, but it's there, definitely.
Let's go to Mark. My family thinks I'm crazy.
Hello.
You're muted.
Muted.
Sorry, not used to muting myself on Zoom. So I definitely think that the reservations and pushing Native Americans on the reservations, like when I hear all that I hear about orphan trains, it reminds me of that, the concept of taking a group of people who have a sort of attachment to one place, maybe energetically, and severing that connection and implanting them somewhere else. But I also think what's interesting is like the concept of like children's books seems to come up around that same time, which is like interesting because you have all these authors who have like a theosophical background or another strange esoteric group, which isn't that strange considering the time. A lot of people who had the money to sit around and write books also joined groups like this, but posing this as like a total hypothetical here, maybe that is a possible indication, and it fits into the world fairs as well, where they show the different races of man, in a very, what we would consider, kind of racist and demeaning way now. But it was in an effort to possibly rewrite history, as far as I know we're going to get to this possibly later on, but as far as the missing time, since it was brought up, I don't know. I mean, we have Chinese culture that goes back as far as BC, and we have history of the whole Chinese dynasty. So, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a period people can look into and say like, oh, well, it doesn't add up here. But, given that kind of existed in its own microcosm, I don't really have much, I don't put much weight to the missing time thing, just given that there is a written history of China going back that far. But that's totally unrelated to the orphan train thing. But what might be related in terms of Chinese people is we hear that they were a big part of building the railroad. And I've heard some more wild speculation that the railroads were already there, and they've been here for, thousands of years. Maybe that's not as wild as I think. I mean, some of the railroads go over mountains in ways that you're like, geez, a bunch of people who spoke different languages work together to do this. It just seems a little impractical, but at the same time, we don't want to take credit away from people. We tend to have this bias, given that we think we're in the most technologically advanced age, that, they couldn't have pulled it off. But I think that just goes back to why I have a lot of suspicion about ancient alien theories, because I think given the right knowledge and also the right technology or even energetic connection to the earth itself, I think we can pull off really incredible works of architecture, sculpture. You see it all over the world, regardless of people, race, or culture. And that's what's so interesting, again, about the World's Fair, is you see this sort of diminution of everything that isn't Anglo-Saxon, or like going back to Roman Greece, you know, not Anglo-Saxon, but definitely this really big emphasis on Western culture as the main driver of progress. And I think that is an indication that the whole thing was propaganda, and what they're covering up. You know, Michelle has talked a lot about this whole subject, so I would just refer to her on a lot of this stuff. But as far as I can tell, it has much further reaches than just orphans on trains.
Excellent. Yeah, that's all good stuff right there too. I agree with you with a lot of that. Michelle, let's get your take on this. Orphan trains. Where did the orphans come from? What were the incubators for? The World's Fairs, and was it some form of indoctrination going on at this time?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you know, let's
Absolutely.
look at the 1800s that we've been talking about. So from my timeline research, around 1830 is when it seems like the ground level of the New World Order was starting. That businesses were started. A lot of communities, a lot of them were, if you look back at, there's a lot of German influence in these early communities, a lot of Jewish influence in these early communities, that, you know, we're starting to get department stores, and, you know, the stores are being set up and the financial system is being laid out. But another thing that's happening is distilleries and breweries are showing up all over the place. So in terms of what we're seeing possibly with the adult population, is they're being given, you know, every opportunity to imbibe that there could possibly be. You know, I can't tell you how many distilleries and breweries I found around that time period. I agree, Ben. I think they were repopulating with the kids. But it was around 1830 that you start having this explosion of parentless children at the same time. Charitable aid associations came into being. There was it was almost like the elite were saying, okay, what are we going to do with these people? You know, we've got these yucky humans here, we've got to do something. And you start seeing the asylums, you know, the workhouses, the insane asylums, the orphanages, you know, all this stuff is coming up about the same time. And I see that whole time period as a mess for humanity. And when you get into this subject of the orphan trains, and again, with the historical narrative, you really have to read between the lines, because they're going to tell you that this was for everybody's good. That they had these kids at the New York Juvenile Asylum, for example. And that was one of the first ones that when Charles Loring Brace started the orphan train program through the Children's Aid Association. It was that particular one in New York that supplied a bunch of kids. And in 1854, they were sent to a place called Dowagiac, Michigan. And most of the kids were adopted. They considered the program a success. The ones that didn't get adopted were shipped on out west. And they're like, hey, we got it. We got a good deal going here. And the ideals of the program are, we're giving these kids, place out of the city. We're giving them homes, but there was no accountability for the kids. And this program went on for, I'm thinking it was about 75 years from that time period. The Charles Loring Brace's orphan train program was supported by people like Mary Astor of the Astor family. And I've come to see it in a couple of different ways. I think it was early child trafficking. It just seems like there was an industrial scale thing going on, because there were no checks or balances for the kids. If they ended up in a good home, I think it was a matter of luck. They would stop these trains in these towns and had these gatherings organized, and the kids would go in and they would be paraded in front of a bunch of strangers, and the strangers would say, oh, okay, I'll take that one. you know, and they might have to sign a piece of paper or something. They were supposed to require or have them get educated and clothe them and feed them, but there was no requirement to adopt them. These are the things that are in the historical narrative. And so that was going on for that period of time. And then you have the inventoriums, which came in at the end of the 19th century, so around in the 1890s. And that was a sideshow attraction that was called healthcare for premature infants. And supposedly the hospitals didn't provide this, but they had all these babies as a sideshow attraction in these incubators that people paid to go and see. That somehow that was healthcare. And this stuff is easy to look up in the narrative. Just type in inventorium and it pops right up. They're not hiding it.
And supposedly it was a sideshow to collect the funds to continue caring for them. That's the narrative.
Was Barnum a part of that sideshow? Was that a part of that?
It was
his
Cooney.
strange.
Cooney was, yeah.
Ew.
Martin Cooney.
Is that Coney Island? Is that same thing or no?
Yeah.
It wasn't the same name. It was like a difference of one letter spelling, but Coney Island had a permanent one. Most of the world fairs had inventoriums.
On the, you know, the point you made about the Astor family, that's really strange considering, you know, John Jacob Astor, you know, was involved with the Titanic, right? He famously perished on the Titanic, and he's also behind the building of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, which is, you know, in all respect, you know, strange looking. Yeah, and not to mention he wrote a science fiction novel, and he also and I'm reading this off Wikipedia, guys. I don't remember this off the top of my head. He also created something called a vibratory disintegrator that got gas out of peat moss. So there's a lot of strange, weird loops you can go, or rabbit holes you can go down with the Astor family specifically.
Right. And Jacob Astor, the first one, was like the first millionaire. And he got heavily involved in the fur trade. He had stuff out there in Oregon. You know, Astoria, Oregon was Jacob Astor.
Yeah, Michelle, I live right in between Portland and Astoria. And I just made that connection right now. I was like, man, I know there's Astoria, Queens. There's Astoria, Oregon. Yeah. So
well, and
Wow.
Go ahead.
So, no, I was just going to say the point being the Astors, if you look up, you know, Illuminati bloodline family, they're one of the names.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were at the ground floor, and that kind of goes back to what you were saying with about Lewis and Clark, Adam. You know, there's a connection with all these elite families and Lewis and Clark.
I wanted to bring up one more thing and shout out to Golden Gate Star Fort Command. And maybe Andy, you can help us on this, and that's the City Beautiful movement.
Andy, before you answer that, I gotta go, guys. So I really appreciate being on the show.
Thanks, Ben.
To all of the people that I've met, some of the couple of people that I haven't met, is great. Nice to meet you guys. Great to see all your guys' faces. I look forward to the next time that we see you. Adam, Dan, Matt, Randy, homie Romy, Michelle, it was nice meeting you. Mr. Steves and Chud, it was nice meeting you as well. Obviously, Andy, love your face. Have a good one. I'll hand it over to you.
So
bye.
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 The City Beautiful.
I've met Ben before.
I would say the City Beautiful would be a great example of some serious programming into the public, it seems. I wish we had Casey on with us because he could go into much more detail about it, but he's found a lot of evidence for it. He's gotten a bunch of stuff off eBay, old collectibles and things like that, all these advertisements for the City Beautiful. And these are like pamphlets and attractions to come see this beautification process of all these different US cities across the nation. And they're all happening around the same time in the 1800s, right around the turn of the century, I think. But yeah, it was just like another thing similar to the World's Fairs, just not on the same level, but it was more of a
seemed like a reclamation project. Like they're cleaning all these up, making them shine and look pretty, and then
But-
showing everybody, look what we did.
Right. And again, we could go down that path where it's like, okay, well, how does this programming work? It's usually give us a story and one piece of it's true and the rest of it's not. So it's like, what part of this is true and what's the big crap fest that doesn't actually fit the real puzzle anymore? You know what I mean? This is a
Yeah.
really tricky part of it. The way that they've tried to program, or what the way it looks to be in the City Beautiful, is that, you know, things are new now. You know, we've upgraded everything. Come check it out. And of course, that's, you know, the truth, or the possible truth would more be like that. Well, no, this is, you know, we're leftover remnants of things or something that we're changing and, you know, using in a different way now, or taking down altogether and rebuilding in our own way.
Yeah.
Can I just add something real quick?
Yeah.
I highly recommend you all look up rural cemetery movement.
Oh,
Just check it out in Wikipedia. That just reminded me of it, Andy. So that's why I wanted to jump in.
Great.
Nice.
And they
that
only
is-
moved the headstones.
and that is a
Ooh.
bizarro piece of history, where you know, say like between 1830, 1850 and 1900, they had these rural cemeteries that were, you know, like art parks for families to go stroll, and you know, they could have their, you know, there was like
Fits the timeline.
a place
Well-
for the commoners, and there was a place for the elite, and sometimes there was a wall between the two, but these beautiful parks. And then around 1900, they're like, oh, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to, you know, change this to like a private area or something like that. But it's just look it up, because there's something there that's just really strange.
does this
Good,
connect
thanks for
in?
that.
Does this connect in any way too with like the national parks and how they make them off limits because there's either something going on in the parks or there's some type of archaeology they don't want us to see, so it just remains
That's
kind of
very
covered up
possible.
by all the bushes and trees and everything else like that? Does
I
it
believe that. I mean,
connect
there's
into that
something
aspect?
really special about these old cemeteries. No joke.
I would say, you know, there's definitely something to that on a esoteric level. I mean, an example of one of these rural cemeteries is one that I know you could still go to. It's in Connecticut, not challenging you in any way, because I'm sure a lot of them have been, you know, closed off or repurposed. But this one is in Yale University, and it has over the, you know, kind of archway that looks very similar to a lot of these. I don't know really the best way to describe them architecturally, but they look like an upside down magnet, like a magnet stuck on the ground.
U-shape arch.
Right. So, and it says the dead shall be raised right above it. It's, you know, kind of a spooky thing that a lot of people point at, like, oh, that's creepy, you know. But there's
That's metal.
mausoleums and there's tons of obelisks, which again, if we're going to go off the electric universe model of things and the way this energy is being utilized by certain groups, I think what, you know, the purpose of something like that would be is for people to be exposed to that sort of energy. And you also see around that same time the horror, you know, kind of genre also developing as well. So it's interesting that they repurpose these mounds, these sacred sites that were once revered and honored by the native peoples that were here, you know, sacred sites that are largely dismissed, uncovered, or thought of for other reasons to be not as significant as they truly are. It would make sense, you know, given a lot of the traditional practices of these like warlike, again, going back to the parasite, where they take a sacred site and then they intern it and bury dead people of their own group in that place, right? I think in New Haven, exactly an example of that, something I learned like 10 years ago from someone who I talk about a bunch, a mentor of mine. He was like, hey, you know, this green we're standing on, you know, a town green is supposed to be a meeting place, a park. They put concerts there. There's churches there. Homeless people hang out there all hours of the day. So it's a green, right? It used to be a burial ground for the tribe that lived in New Haven before the Dutch came and named it New Haven. So they take the place that once was a place where the dead were buried, turn that into a public area, much like Michelle just mentioned, and then they take
Seems like a
the
common theme.
right, and then they take a place that maybe was sacred for other reasons, not a burial ground, and that's where they choose to bury their dead. And maybe they realize, like, hey, we got to keep this under wraps, so let's not make it a theme park attraction. Let's just close the gates.
Wow. Fucking amazing.
I think they
Roman,
definitely use national parks to cover up old ancient mounds too. Like they'll just be like, "Oh, this is
Yeah.
all national forest, totally fed land. Don't go exploring in here because we have guns now." It's fed land. Crazy. I was thinking about the orphan trains, and like something that I thought was just like, okay, let's try to think about this from a numerical logistical numerical standpoint. How many humans were alive on the population during the 1860, right? And I was like, let's look it up, and there was like a lot. There's a lot of humans alive in 1860. Let's see, year 1860, 1870.
So we're told, right?
Oh, geez.
Yeah, how did that census work
So we're
out
told,
on like sub-Saharan Africa?
well, this is, I mean, yeah, right. I know
in
this
the
is the
Amazon.
estimates of historical world population on Wikipedia. So it's just like the most mainstream, information you can get. But it's really like, yeah, if you have the right books that were, used as a census at that time, if they were taking global census at that time. But the point I'm getting at is like, when talking about the mud flood and like there being a massive amount of people wiped out, well, then how many people were left recorded at that time? Like afterwards that they're saying are recorded. It's just another point I wanted to look at for having just another like point of view for that time period of the orphan trains.
Are you saying like
where
maybe
did
we
all
should
these kids
see like
come
a
from?
decline, like a big decline or something in population at some point, like right there?
How did we get to the billions that we have today
Mm,
from the 1860s? What's the average, growth rate of families at that point in time? Looking at those kinds of like, that shit. And then, so what they're going to do is they're going to completely modify the population, right? Numbers through whatever type of agenda they have. So, but if we look for world populations in different types of censuses and try to put an alternative number to the mainstream number, then we might be able to come up with another type of conclusion for that, like where the fuck all these kids came from, how they came from. There would be either the other half, which is their two parents deceasing, or it's they're giving their children up because they're being forced to give their children up. Potentially, I don't know, human trafficking's probably been a thing for the entirety of humankind, which is unfortunate, but I mean, just look at it now. I mean, I don't see it being any different. There, as long as there's the shadow entity that hangs upon, the human consciousness, which is the darkness, and to do whatever fucked up things that require humans to do human trafficking with. That's a whole standpoint I look at. I think trains, I think kids, I think human trafficking. I think of the fucked up stories that I know happen now, and like the terrible things. So that's all I got on orphan trains. I mean, like I've read the books, some books. What was the one? Henry Ford. He went and burned all the train stations down across, because like we had a shit ton of trainways all across the country, and people were really into taking the train everywhere, and like they didn't really, like, people were like, yeah, like individual cars, that's awesome, right? But also it's just like, well, when you take away all the public transportation or hide it or suppress it, basically, then you're being forced to take individual transportation. So there's something fishy with the railroads in general, right? And if it was our Tartarian architecture and powered by some sort of magnetic, type of technology, and then so the trains in general are Tartarian fishery, if you will, and I will. And yeah, I don't know. Next question.
All right. Hold on. We haven't
Before-
got to
real
Matt
quick-
yet, but
Okay.
real quick. What's up,
real
Andy?
quick, I was gonna say it's not necessarily the orphan trains, but it's interesting to note that there was a lot of research about single mothers and bastard children, and being coerced into giving their children up for money and selling them.
MK Ultra type shit.
Yeah, way before supposed MK Ultra specifically, but I mean, everything's a precursor to another precursor to another precursor. This is all fractal.
So let's go to Matt. And I know Matt's been doing a lot of stuff over on his podcast about the old world and Tartaria, and doing mud flood stuff and orphan trains and world's fairs and everything. So I'm sure he has a little bit more information to add to this subject right here. So what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, the orphan trains are interesting, and one of the things that I never really pieced together until I listened to Michelle was putting together the idea of the increase in asylums at that time, and how as you see the rise in asylums, that could explain where the parents went without a drastic population decrease. So that's one potential idea, and that also assists with the re-indoctrination, so to speak. Those would probably be the outliers that wouldn't agree to the new narrative, or they'd be difficult to convince of the new narrative, right? So
all those tinfoil hat wearers, right?
Yeah, so you get them and you throw them into a nut house, and then you have all these children. I mean, I think that has some substance to it. So
Definitely.
That's where
these asylums are the FEMA camps of their day.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, and look at the buildings. It's not like they're throwing them in these cheap buildings. These are elaborate architectural structures, right? They're what we would call this time frame of structures that could go back thousands of years, or they could be, a couple hundred years. But these are, and they're massive buildings as well. So it all kind of ties in together. And then when you think about the incubators, that's another area where they could have gotten babies. It all ties in, and I think that one could be a little bit more nefarious, because I've seen a few things where they were talking about those could possibly be, the first clone babies and things like that they were trying to keep alive. And but the whole idea of the incubators is a terrible idea in itself, because you're depriving children of any social or motherly interaction. So those children are automatically going to start off with severe issues, developmental issues going forward. And, they were basically the same way. They were a sideshow. Cooney traveled them around the world and showed them off, and at times they were allowed to be purchased. So yeah, it's another ties into the go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just going to say, I'll give you another rabbit hole, and
Oh God,
you can look this up. But the year the inventorium program ended was about the same time Planned Parenthood, the organization that became Planned Parenthood, started, and that was like 1942, 1943. Because there was a fire at the Coney Island Inventorium, and Cooney's like, okay, well, I got to get out of this business. And about that time, Margaret Sanger started this organization that became Planned Parenthood, which I thought was really interesting.
That's great. I'd never heard that before. That's a fascinating point right there. And that ties in with a lot of things, right? And you see that throughout history, where one program ends and another just picks up. I mean, we see it today with social media networks and things, but it goes back throughout history. And that's a fascinating one.
Wow. So I know we've been going for a little over 2 hours already. I still have about four more questions to get into. So if anybody needs to go or whatever, you can go ahead and go. I don't want you to go, but I know maybe some people only block out 2 hours for these types of things usually. So but I do have more questions. And the next question, I can tell you the points. The next one is, who were the builders and who were the inheritors? And then the next question, we're going to get into lost tech. Did they know how to control electricity? Were they using it for healing, cymatics, and sound healing? What were the buildings used for? When were these structures built? And the symbolism in the structures themselves and everywhere else. And then another one is star forts, and then missing time. And then one last question that we could probably end it on would be the inevitable flat earth question, and how flat earth is connected with the Tartaria situation. So I just want you guys to know what the upcoming ones are. So you can judge your time wisely. Is there any of those
for another
situations
3
that
hours on this.
yeah, is there any of those questions that anybody wants to get into because they might be leaving soon and they have something to say about it? No,
I'm
we're
good
good.
until 11.
Okay.
I mean, I'm good for another 45 minutes.
I know we're good on we got some East Coasters here, and I know it's late over there. It's probably 11, a little after 11 there, so I don't want to hold
It's
up
Friday
anybody.
night, dude. Are you challenging me?
Oh, I
I'll
gotta
stay
work in the
until 2
morning.
a.m.
I work in the morning. It's only 9
I
here
actually
for
gotta
me,
work
so
too.
I got tons of time. But and I always got time for all of you guys, man. I swear.
We
So
looking
then
for a
let's get
part
into
two
that.
here?
Who say what?
Are we looking for a part two too?
No, I don't want to do a part 2.
but I'm not opposed to it being on a part 2. Just saying, but I also can rock it to my socks.
Let's
come
well,
on.
let's rock it. Let's
If you guys
We'll
want
rock
to
it for a
that's
little while
fine.
longer.
I'll toss the host over to you, dude. It'll keep streaming and recording and all that shit, and then I'm gonna bounce out too because I got to work tomorrow. So
okay.
let me add you as host.
Beautiful.
All right.
Napa Insane Asylum is one that's really close to me. And when I brought it up a couple times on our show, and I just thought, like, I definitely think that there's a big tie with like taking over a lot of these like old, like, because most of them are turned into churches or cathedral. They call them off, pass them off as cathedrals.
You're talking about Napa State Hospital.
Yes. Have you been there?
Yeah, I went to high school in St. Helena, so there was a 7-Eleven
crazy
by there.
son bitch. Let's go.
But have you ever seen the video of when they let the Cramps play there in like the late 70s?
I'm a big Cramps fan.
Dude, it's on YouTube. It's literally insane. They let the Cramps go and play at a mentally insane hospital.
The art that's in there apparently is nuts. Like, and now it's known as like the Department of State Hospital of California, the Department of State Hospital. So it's got some deep esoteric ties to it and occultic shit going on. And also live like 45 minutes away from Bohemian Grove too. So like if anybody's ever in the Northern California redwoods and wants to get a little field work going in, just hit me up. I'm down.
All right. Well, let's get into the next question then real quick. Who were the builders and who were the inheritors? So this is gonna like who are the controllers now? Were they the ones that took over these Tartarian structures? And how much does a religion play a part in this whole dynamic? And we'll start off with Michelle on this one.
Okay. Yeah, because I have some pretty definite ideas about who I think we're talking about. So I believe that we talked about the Jesuits and talked about the Masons earlier, and I think there was a huge infiltration into the Masonic lodges. And I think Freemasonry is just that. They didn't build them. They just took credit for them, and they took over up to 33 degrees. They didn't build anything, but they're good at reverse engineering or using the occult as a control mechanism. The original Masons, I believe, date back to ancient Mu and were Moorish. And Mark, I guess I need to talk to you because Dan and Romy said I should talk to Rosben sometime.
Yes.
So
I can't make any promises, but I could definitely do my best to put you in touch with them. I think that would be a great future episode if we could convince him to do a group show. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, because I think everything's laid out according to sacred geometry. I think every building and every piece of infrastructure was precisely placed, and that was part of the grid system. The original Moorish Masons had 360 degrees and basically knew what they were doing, knew where they were on the planet or on the plane planet. There's no question they knew what they were doing. And I think everything got infiltrated, and their symbolism and everything else got taken over by the Freemasons, and the Freemasons became them with the fezzes, and they're dressing up and pretending to be the master builders, but they're just using masonry to take down, try to harm humanity. And
infiltrate.
And what was the other part of your question? Because there was a tie-in.
Who the controllers are, and how does religion play a part, and who were the inheritors of these buildings?
Okay, so I think that organized religion came in with a hijack of the timeline, and that originally humanity was learning how to reconnect with our higher selves. And if you think Tibetan Buddhism or Hinduism or something along those lines, I think they were in a higher consciousness. But as far as the inheritors, I think we're talking an inversion of everything, and Zionists and the whole 9 yards as far as what we're seeing today. I think this whole thing has been about an attempt to, for this dark side to take over the top spot and become the instead of turning us into the likeness of our creator, they want to turn us into the likeness of them. And we're finally, we're waking up. We're waking up to that.
Excellent. Yeah, that's what I would say too, is that the Roman Catholic Church, or the Catholics, came in and kind of destroyed all of the pagan culture. Anything that was said to be pagan, like alchemy or magic or anything esoteric or witchcraft, anything that was used like natural medicines and everything like that, has been all flipped and is all evil and bad because the pagans did it. And now use pharmacopoeia, use pharmacy drugs, use science is the new law, and they kind of just flipped everything. You have to believe in our God or we're going to destroy you. Same thing they did to the Native Americans of this land. And it goes all throughout Europe and all throughout the other countries too, that they spread this and they try to just take over. So what they did was they just demonized everything else that they didn't like, made it seem bad. There's even, you could get into sexual relations too, and sex, and the Puritans coming over here early in our history also, and all of that type of stuff. So let's flip it over to Andy.
So what are we getting into right now?
This is who were the builders?
The controllers. Yeah.
And who are the controllers? Because when we say Tartaria, it sounds like we're talking. It's so blanket term. For me, sometimes I don't understand if we're talking about who are the controllers now, or who was here before when we talk about Tartaria. So I just want a definitive answer on who we believe each of those people are, or where they came from, or you could generalize that too, I guess.
Do you hear Tor in Tartaria?
Tartaria.
Yeah. So the Tor, all the way back to the saga again with the Tor friend, right?
Yeah, and Tartarus,
and also the
hellhole.
The idea of the Tor forming the key, which was near Crete. And it's like, oh, you have a country, Turkey, right there.
Yeah, Turkey. Yeah,
it's very weird. I think the original builders were some sort of perennial philosophy worshiping, nature derived kind of society of some kind. And I'm very curious how a society like that gets taken over, you know what I mean? Or falls from grace or something. It's really weird. But the ones who have inherited are, I think we're in agreement across the board that it's this same serpentine trickster group that always hides behind good guys and vulnerable groups throughout history and likes to play the victim all the time. So I don't know where that leads exactly. I have some ideas, And it leads
The
down some
Voldemorts.
Yeah,
pretty
I mean,
dark roads.
yeah, when we look at our government now and the players in the government and what they all connect back to, they all connect back to certain organizations, right, or groups. And then you can see that those groups also connect into certain religious organizations and groups. And then you can justify or make a assertion that most likely this group is what is controlling everything else.
There's also something else about the inversion that, you know, you and Yake and I have talked about on a number of occasions, about how, like, it's kind of like at some point both sides seem to play that hand often. And when you go back in time far enough and you try to relate certain things to, you know, more recent history, you find that the dualities you're trying to pin onto the older past don't even exist, because they're all good and bad guys, or
Right.
you know, it's very bizarre. It's almost like, yeah, we just have the dualities are set up for us almost, you know, and when meanwhile it's like, or maybe we've lost our connection to that past, so we don't remember that how these terms and symbols were placed and where they come from are a lot more arbitrary sometimes than we think too.
Yeah, so I would use the parental reference in this, and the fact that are they really evil? Are they really telling us we can't do this and we can't do that just to be hateful? Or are they telling us that things because they really believe that it's for our own good and that they're helping us in a way, you know, like telling your kid that you don't have money to go buy them their toy at Target that they want, but then you go home and you go buy yourself or whatever, and they go, well, how come you bought that? Well, it's my money. You know,
it seems like that's the model, but they're not parents. That's the problem.
yeah, exactly.
That's the model they try to use, but they're children themselves or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Mark, what you got to say? Because I know you're going to go a little different.
With the question on who are the inheritors and who are the was the second part?
Who's the builders? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we have a lot of evidence for, you know, as Michelle put, multiple different cultures, you know, specifically in that case, the Moors, but you guys put it, the Northern European cultures. And as I was kind of bringing up earlier, possibly the Mongols, and then even further, like Chud brought up really early on, the Native Americans, right? So there's all these groups that were potentially diaspora from this pre-flood civilization. Whether or not they are builders or inheritors, I think, you know, the builders, my bet is that it was pre-flood, depending on what structure we're looking at, you know. The more significant, beautiful, outstanding ones, for sure, pre-flood. But in the case of, you know, the people who are, you know, stopping all of this for the deceivers or the coverters, I thought, you know, that was more the angle I wanted to take with it, because there's all these groups that claim to have sort of, you know, divine right. You know, we see these groups who claim to have some kind of secret knowledge. And, you know, one group specifically, the Freemasons, even goes back to the Temple of Solomon, which, you know, is by all intensive purposes one of these buildings, whether it exists anymore or it's submerged under the ground, or maybe it's a melted mountain now, who knows. But I think that is extremely significant to a lot of conspiracy theories. I don't want to go down the, you know, the Jewish route that they're all to blame, because I don't think that's the explanation, but I think that might be why there's this historical anti-Semitism associated with conspiratorial thinking, because it does relate inherently to that part of the globe, or, you know, or the plane, you know, whichever side of it you're in. But that's for the end of the conversation. But yeah, I think there's definitely, whether it's aristocratic, royal, or just straight up secret society, there is a group that's working to obscure the actual truth of where we come from. And I think we can look towards those cataclysms as marker points. And what we see is the cultures who had a strong naval presence proliferated around the globe and most likely retook those structures that were left behind. So yeah, that's where I kind of lean with all that.
Hey,
All right,
more
let's go to
on
Matt.
that Jewish timeline thing that, you know, it's once again, it's that hiding behind vulnerable groups, you know, and playing the victim. It's just that same thing playing out, it seems.
Yeah. Matt, what you got to say?
You're muted.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Can't hear you. We can't hear you.
It'd help if the mic wasn't muted. Sorry. Jesus. It's late over here. It's like 12:30, so I'm way past my bedtime. No, so I would say as far as the narrative goes, you look at everything and it goes back to the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church and
City of London.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where this whole new, especially the latest great reset, last few have focused around them. So that's where they're the kind of boogeyman, that hides and again plays the victim a lot of the times. And as far as who built it, there's so many different possibilities and but the one thing you see consistently is similar architecture, right? Especially in the era that we're talking about. We're talking about that Greco-Roman style of architecture. There's obviously different levels. There's, you can go back to the pyramids, you can go back to Göbekli Tepe. That's a whole different era, I think, than what we're talking about here in Tartaria. But yeah, the architecture, I lean towards the idea of a lot of Moorish influence into it, because you see a lot of their elements in the architecture. And listening to a lot of Michelle's work, you see the influence of the Moors in a lot of this. But yeah, I don't have one specific group that would say, oh, they built all of this.
So to go back to Bach Saga a little bit, they refer to themselves as the Arctic people, or the people from the Ark. And so when you see a lot of this archaeology or architecture or
archangels,
archangels, it all seems to have to do with this center point. And there's this 7,000-year-old ostrich egg that has a carving on it of 3 pyramids in the Nile River, and at the top you see, at the very top of this egg, you see 3 rings on it and a hole in the top. And it's almost like they're saying, hey, look, this is where Atlantis is at the top. And so
someone screen share this.
I think that's it's a very interesting archaeological find that even shows that the story has some merit. And when you look at the words of ark, you see it in all of this architecture, right? In the archways and all these fabulous buildings. And even in the reliefs, you see a lot of times gargoyles and stuff like that, and like kind of evil faces that you wouldn't really associate with a church wanting to have on their building. If they built it, why would they put those types of things on it? So that's I guess that's my 2 cents. I'm gonna kick it over to Adam and Judd.
And Dan, just looking at the language of that, you go back to the beginning of it, the AR, and then you look at the reverse of that is Ra. You go back to sun and all that, and it's very interesting that you say that. Now that I'm going to look into that a lot more, because that's a fascinating connection right there.
Yeah. The angels too, right? They're associated with the angels.
Yeah.
And the Anglo land England. Yeah, and the angles. And an interesting thing about the word angel, the etymology means a circle or a corner, which is kind of like the compass and the square of Freemasonry, right? So that's another interesting connection there. But yeah, Chud and Adam, what you got?
I don't know that I have too much to add on this one that hasn't already been said.
Fair enough.
Because I'm pretty open to who it could be. I like where Michelle goes with the Moors for sure. You know, what blows my mind about the concept of these builders is that it does, like a lot of other people have said, it seems that these people had a different level of consciousness than we have. And what could happen that makes them able to be taken over and destroyed? You know, it seems like there had to have been some kind of major violence, whether that was violence from nature or from other man. You know, it's hard to say, but you know, because if I think about, well, but we're so manipulable in today's culture, you know, like we are, it's easy to get people to do whatever. We can be herded in any direction, it seems, you know, through all of our devices and our data collection and all this kind of stuff. But what could have led to the demise of something, of a group of people who were what I have to assume were so much better than us at understanding the world they live in.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of a trip to think about, but then I think, well, it's got to have been some kind of cataclysm. Maybe it was self-destruction. You know, high energy weapons gets brought up sometimes, and you know, was it on accident?
Yeah.
Was it not? And you know, I mean, was it, hey, we're gonna, I mean, could it have been something even, you know, if we could try and put some, I like to play a game sometimes where I put benevolence on the what I call the predator class, the elites, instead of being predators. You know, what if the destruction of all this was from something that had to do with them trying to get outside of Earth and explore what we call space, and that backfired and caused an entire global meltdown or plane meltdown or whatever. And now the people that I usually look at terribly, what I call the predator class, what if their benevolent group of people are going, what we need to do is keep people suppressed, because we know that they're going to want to experience the stars, and we know what happens when we try to get out of this place. You know, I mean, I'm just throwing some shit out there. Just
no, that's
fun.
good.
But you know, it's a trip to think about all that stuff.
Adam?
Chud, I think you just described that whole Johnny Lawrence from the Karate Kid situation, or if you look at it through a different lens, Daniel LaRusso's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Hey, I think it's good to do from time to time, just to keep ourselves on our toes.
Trick, man.
I need a devil's advocate constantly. just playing that. It's very important. Very important.
Well, in the interest of time and trying to get through this, while Michelle's still here, I'll take a pass on this one.
All right. Rando.
I'll take a pass on that too. Thanks, man.
Romy.
Okay. Going back to expanding Earth theory and potential of there being an Agartha, if there was, reptilian people could be symbolic for snakes, representing like lower ground. Like snakes are never a bad interpretation in my eyes, right? Like the snake in the Bible of that forest of Adam and Eve and that whole story, and just snakes being represented, not necessarily being evil, but they represent like the earth, right? And then I just think whoever holds the esoteric knowledge, really, whoever holds the books of the reign of knowledge that rules everything that happens here on the plane, whoever that is, I have no definitions of who the fuck it is, but whoever's holding the esoteric knowledge and are tapping into inner earth to understand the true power of the planet, man. That's who doing it for me. That's all I got for that.
All right. Well, let's get into some star forts then. And are they star forts? Do they have some connection to Tartaria? Are they just bastion forts? Are they just there to protect cities from intrusion? Are they hydroelectric power plants? Are they city engines? Why were they all over the planet? And what were these star forts protecting? What was the significance of them? Like, what was in the middle of them that they need to have all this architecture around them to protect something? That seems like an important question to me. I'm gonna shove that off on to Michelle, since you're on time here, and help us understand these star forts a little bit.
Okay. Can say yes. That's just so many of the things that you were saying. They are typically 4 or 5 points, but they're in different shapes. And they're typically in at least pairs of 2, but sometimes there's 3 or 4, and in some places and a lot of small islands have a lot of star forts. Bermuda had a lot of star forts, and Fernando and Noronha off the coast of Brazil had a lot of star forts, and the Channel Islands have a lot of star forts. So, and then you follow river systems and you find them all up and down rivers, and they're the same, it's the same all over the earth, this heavy masonry. And I personally think they were some kind of circuitry or battery on the grid system. There seems to be some kind of cymatic connection to these star forts with regards to their shape. And I'm not saying I understand how that works in there, but there, a number of people made that connection. And I think they were, when this whole reset happened, I think they were repurposed as military, and then they became targets for destruction. So during the Civil War, during World War I, World War II, these star forts were like the first places that got hit. So I think it was just, this looks like a fort, and they're all they're turned into military, and they were supposed to have been built as coastal defenses and whatnot.
Right. So why would they have been the first place to get hit though? That's like my main question is like, what is there something inside of it? Is it some type of engine? If they
I'm sure
if they destroy it, does it like stop water from flowing, or does it stop the city from working anymore or something? Is it like a very weak point for the whole civilization that's built around it?
I think
a
they
lot
were.
Of it has to do with the specific shape, right? Of it, like does it have to do with the gosh, I'm thinking of sacred geometry of the building of it?
I think that's all in there, and I think they wanted to destroy the infrastructure of this civilization. What they've used a lot of it, but I think they wanted to destroy a lot of it, and that's what the wars were about. And they don't want humanity to know how advanced we were at one time.
I think it's very interesting that there's 2 of them closely associated with each other, because that kind of sounds like a binary star system, and they're star forts, right? So if you have 2 star forts in 2 different locations across from each other, you're basically almost like simulating in like a solar system in a way.
Battery or something.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely in the mix. I think there was an energy exchange between the structures on Earth and the celestial bodies. And that, the same concept goes into your question about cathedrals and what they were doing, about drawing down cosmic energy. So I think there was like an exchange going on, between Earth and sky. And, the controllers or inheritors or whatever you want to call them have, seriously gotten rich off of the technology of the original civilization. So it's like they need it and they want it, but they also want to destroy it at the same time. So you've got, you know, a lot of infrastructure that's been destroyed, but there's still a lot that's still standing.
Oh, I'm gonna
There's
kick it over to you, Matt, too, because I know you've been doing a lot of stuff on star forts on your show.
Yeah,
What and you
and
kind
the
of
more
did
I
some
look in-
crystal palaces and stuff too. So maybe you can bring up the crystal palaces also, because that's interesting too.
Yeah, they're both fascinating. I mean, the Crystal Palace is just one of those narratives that doesn't make any sense. There was so much glass used in the construction of it. It was a structure that was massive. I believe it was 1,800 feet by about 700 feet. And it was in a cross shape, and it was just a massive, and it was all glass and iron frame. And so they built this thing in 6 to 9 months, supposedly, for the 1851 London Expo. And not only did they build it, but they also dismantled it, moved it, and then supposedly rebuilt it over in Sitem, which it stayed there for a period of time and then burnt down. And then
how do you burn a glass building?
The glass building
well,
burnt down.
the more you look into it, there was a lot of wood in it. Obviously, the flooring was wood, and a lot of the
wow.
Yeah, look at this thing. I mean, it's just mind blowing. What is this? The AOL days?
Hey Matt, did you?
Yeah, man. What the heck, bro?
Did you come across anything that said where all that glass had been manufactured and shipped in from?
They said it was all local. It was all from England. And it's the same thing when you go into because there was multiple crystal palaces, right? There was the one in London, and then New York did one in 1853 for their expo.
Yeah, San Francisco had one.
Yeah, and then you go.
I wonder what the technology was that they were showcasing about this crystal palace. Was it just the architecture that they built, and that was the wow, or was it holding with certain technology within the building?
I think it was just another style of architecture that was, you know.
They did showcase a lot of technologies, not only at that one, but others. No, and my feeling was that was like the official kickoff of the new timeline was the 1851 exposition. But you know, all the names of the day were there. You know, Samuel Colt and his revolver, and you know, all of these inventions, and then you're right, Matt. I mean, the story is just nonsensical.
Oh, it's ludicrous. I mean, you look at the amount of just the supplies alone that were needed, and then to tell us it was built in 9 months tops. Some say even 6 months. I mean, it goes in with the whole World Fair narrative that everything was built at this hyper speed that by even today's standards, with unlimited budget and unlimited manpower and unlimited equipment, we could not recreate. So it's just fascinating. And you look, and the interesting one is the German glass palace, they called it, that they said all the glass came from Germany. And again, we're talking mid 1860s, late 1860s, and it's at a time where glass manufacturing had not been perfected yet. So to have it on this scale, these things do not make sense with the narrative that they're being told. So then we bounce over to the star forts. That's another interesting one, because you look at them and there's many more that are being uncovered with people on Google Earth nowadays than were being, announced in the narrative number. Because you'll see the number anywhere from 1,600 to 7,000 to 10,000 possible star forts out there. And I the more I look at them, the more questions I have. Were they strictly built for defensive purposes? I find that hard to believe. I mean, why would you put in all that effort and all, especially like Michelle said, from the cymatic and the architectural standpoint, to go through all that intricate design just for it to be a defensive structure. I'm sure there's many more effective ways to do that than, and these were elaborate. I mean, if we look at some of the patterns of these, it's just mind blowing. They look exactly like snowflakes, stars. Some of them have 6, 8-sided structures around them. I mean, they're just tremendous. But usually one of the other things that they incorporate is water. So when you look at that, that's a natural source too, a conductor. And one of the other things they said is that maybe those cymatic patterns also impacted the water, which would then impact everything. And just one more thing to add is in addition to these star forts and structures like this, there's also a bunch of round towers, they're called, that were found throughout Ireland and the UK. And they've been found to be excellent conductors as well. And these structures appear all over. And there's been some interesting work on those as well. So I think, you know, and I don't have any facts to back it up, but, you know, one of my theories that I'm leaning on is like Michelle said, there was a world grid, and it was worked with ethereal energy and the architecture on the ground. And when they were building structures, they were working with the grid, working with nature. They were giving back as well as receiving. Whereas today we just seem to consume, and we've lost that connection with nature. And that's why things are so out of whack.
Oof.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I agree with that one. Roman, what do you got to say? Anything?
Star forts are cool. Like someone like I recommended earlier, the observation deck. This guy makes great documentaries. He does a lot of work on them. Yeah, it's huge. There's a massive amount of them. There's star cities, which is cool. Shit, I think I have them written down in my notes. Yeah, star cities exist. I think there's something definitely to tapping into the frequency resonance of the areas. You know, all these things were built very according to the grid, and understanding of the grid is so hard for us to understand because that information is being heavily suppressed. And I think, Michelle, you can tap on that too, for sure, because it must have taken you just hours of research to try to find where these energetic hotspots were, right? I mean, fucking months, right? How long?
I've been researching steadily for over 3 years now.
Yeah.
Following alignments.
I did have one question too for you specifically. It's not tied to the star forts, but what do you sorry if this is completely side rails everything.
Fucking Roman.
But while we have you on the air, what about Bermuda and energy hotspot there? You said something about Bermuda earlier.
Bermuda was full of star forts. It was full of them.
Oh, wow.
And you can look online. There's a map that was supposed to have been drawn by Captain John Smith, who was like the Pocahontas guy or something like that, Virginia Company in the 1600s. But there's an old map, if you look up star forts of Bermuda, and I'm just guessing, let's say there's 20 illustrations of the different ones, and there's still some that are standing. Fort, or the Fernando de Noronha off the coast of Brazil, small island, and there's a dozen at least star forts or former star forts. I think there were certain places that were probably like energy generator power nodes or something like that, and I think that's what those places were. Channel Islands too, and I think Crete had a lot of star forts.
Has anybody ever been to one besides the Statue of Liberty?
Nobody? Nope.
I mean, no. I have, I grew up in Maryland, and I remember going on a field trip to Fort McHenry when I was a kid. Long before I started waking up to any of this stuff.
Let's go to Mark. Star forts.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to add to Adam's question. I will add, though, you know, here where I live in Connecticut, there was a fort that was built by the Dutch along the Connecticut River. Like Adam said, on the bay of the Hudson River there, you have potential star forts. I heard there was one connected to what we now call Wall Street. But yeah, I don't really have much else to add about star forts other than they're definitely interesting. And I think when it comes to these structures that have clear like geometric patterns, you gotta imagine they're either using some sort of advanced sacred geometry to plan that out, or the more mundane theory that it's just tactical. I think it has more to do with sacred geometry and the way water flows. But yeah, I don't really have much to add on star forts.
All right, Adam and Chud.
I guess I'd just be interested in knowing what it's like to be at one. I'd want to research. I'm interested in all this stuff and researching what's close to me, because I think you can find anybody in the world can find something close to them within an hour or two from where they are. But I talked to Howdy Mikowski on my show, and he told me about going to Stonehenge and all these different ley lines, and he talks about how Stonehenge is just a dead site with no energy transfer at all. And then he just goes down the road to all these other unknown stone structures and things like that, and he feels an amazing sense of energy being transferred from those to him. And I wonder, I'm just curious to see if there's anything like that can still be experienced through these star forts. So
there is a Stonehenge in your part of the world, Adam, at the Mary Hill Stonehenge. I think it's on the border of Oregon and Washington. And and what we're told is that it was built as a war memorial back in the early 1900s or something like that. But it's like a perfect Stonehenge. So that might be a place you could go visit.
You say Mary Hill or Murray Hill?
Mary Hill Stonehenge.
Okay.
Interesting to note that there's equally a New England Stonehenge in New Hampshire. So we got the one on each side in the north. That's very interesting.
There's one in South America too.
Oh, is there? Jeez.
We should all take a local trip to our local star forts and do a little video on it or something.
Yeah, that's a cool idea.
Here's the Star City right here, y'all. Berlin was apparently one of the major star cities where the entire kind of like river system, they're probably getting electricity through this waterway here. And
that makes sense.
But if you look at Berlin now, like all of this is just huge, cityscape and stuff like that. So there were major cities built like this as well, and I think we've all seen like the circuit board cities and stuff like that too.
And there were star cities in North America too. If you can see, if you look up an old map of Charleston, South Carolina, it's a star city.
Wow.
And probably New York too. I would think New York was.
Hey, so I got to get going, but if I could add my little take on the Star Fort real quick.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to link it right back to the Box Saga. Because what's interesting is like some of them don't. Well, first of all, the shape itself of many of them, the specific like arrow-headed shape of a lot of the outliers on the the outside parts of them, they seem to kind of symbolize like the sun to me, like sun shining outwards, because it looks like that symbol that's it can be the symbol for chaos, but it's also like the symbol of a sun where all arrows are pointing outwards in every direction. And interestingly enough, on another note about the star forts, not all of them are star shaped, but they're considered star forts for various reasons. I guess different attributes about them that they have in common. But like, for instance, Palma Nova in Italy, it was built supposedly in 1593, but it was supposedly a model of utopia, and it looks exactly like the ringed city structures of Atlantis or Udenma of
Oh.
Bach Saga. Maybe I could pull up a picture. Hang on.
And Andy, it looks like CERN.
Yeah,
Interesting.
dude. Yes, it does.
It
Yeah.
does.
That goes a little bit into the idea of a binary star system with the sun and the moon aspect, and then the whole city existing within that solar system of architecture. A city system. Wonder what the etymology of the word city is really.
I definitely think there's a connection to electricity.
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 Yeah.
And I'm going to have to jump off.
All right.
Yeah, I am too, but I wanted to share a picture real quick with you guys if I could.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle, for joining us. We appreciate you here. You definitely
thank
help.
you so much, Michelle.
Definitely help smooth some of the other things out that we had going on in our heads, and answered questions a little bit deeper than most of us could. So we appreciate that. And I know a lot of people love you around here. So give out if anybody wants to get in contact, let me know. I can get you in touch with Michelle if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please. That would be wonderful.
Excellent.
And Romy, I'll send you the map that I found of South Carolina. There's like 2 old maps that show it
Nice.
as a
thank
star
you.
city.
Excellent.
But great. I was really glad to be here and honored to be here. So thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Michelle.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Michelle.
All right. Good night,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.
It was a beautiful night.
Good
And
night, you too.
thank you,
homies,
Andy.
everybody.
Good night, guys.
Thank you so much for having me. Come check me out at the Deep Share if you don't already. And you guys rule. Thank you so much for doing this and doing this entire Tartaria month, man. These guys killed it all month long. All these guests you had on, it was unbelievable, man.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
yeah.
Fuck
Yeah, we
baby.
wanted to try to cover as many different aspects of it without actually covering it in a way, and just so that we could have this conversation right now. Because if you listen to the shows, you realize that there's a Jesuit connection, you realize there's some biblical connection, you realize there's an alchemy connection. I think there's a lot of important things, even some of them that we missed and didn't get to do stuff about, which is astrology. I think is another big connection that we need to break into. Maybe next time, if we do another Tartaria month, we need to get into the astrology aspect. And there's several other ones too. I'd like to get in touch with Golden Gate Starfort Command and talk about the City Beautiful movement and stuff like that too, and a lot of other things that we could have covered. But thank you very much, Andy. We appreciate your time here, sir. And
Thanks, guys.
And being nice. Thank you.
Appreciate it. See you.
And who
And I gotta
hasn't-
get going too. It's
Yeah,
All right,
one,
Matt.
1 o'clock
Yeah,
out here. I
I'm
gotta
heading
hit the
out too,
hat.
guys.
All right.
Yeah.
You wanna do one more thing, Randy, on Star Forts, and then
Yeah, let me chime in on that. How about guys, Matt was talking about the crystal palaces and the problem being with the glass manufacturing, right?
yeah.
You look at some of these star forts and you look at a problem of, okay, where are the bricks coming from, right? For in particular, there's one,
glass.
it's the same problem. You have a supply issue with when these things were supposed to have been built, right? How do you come up with all these bricks or all this masonry to create a star fort?
Manufacturing plants.
Right, but if you break down to the volume that you're able to pump out any given year or for that time period, you're running into a similar problem as how are they getting all the glass for all
It
this
takes
for the
as much
crystal
time
palaces?
to make the equipment to order it, to get it made, to get it built. Like that's from,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah,
Even
that's all I got.
just milling all the wood for the World's Fairs and stuff like that. Like just
Would take
milling it all.
months.
It's a
Yeah.
logistical nightmare, all of it.
Yeah, and then getting it there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fuck.
Well, good night, guys.
All right.
Later,
Thank
Have a
you.
good one,
dude.
Randy. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna be cutting out too, guys.
Yeah, Chud and
All
I have
right,
been going
Chud.
for
I've
5
got
hours.
a big
No
old day
worries.
tomorrow.
All right.
There you go. Go and kick that
Thanks,
day's
guys.
ass, man.
Go
I
check
will.
out Deborah Gets Red Pill and their sub podcast into the apocalypse.
It won't be as confusing soon, guys. We'll change it up pretty quick here, so.
You're doing a great job, y'all.
Excellent. Thanks, guys, for joining us.
Yeah, Dan, thank you so much for putting this together. Mark, it was
Yeah.
awesome hanging out again. Chudex, I'll see you soon. Romy,
Yeah.
do you remember meeting me in person? It was
Fuck yeah,
dark.
dude. You're kidding at
Yeah,
Manifest, baby.
yeah.
Of course I remember that shit. You and Dean
Yeah.
chilling by the fire, drinking
Yeah, we got to
brews.
talk
That
to
was a
Dean
great
that
night.
night. Yeah.
All right, guys.
Fuck yeah.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks.
Later.
All right, peace.
Later. And we're left with the mystical,
Let's get it again.
magical Mark Steves Palmer.
Yeah. I just
My
wanted
family
to.
thinks I'm crazy.
I just didn't want to miss anything, and I also wanted to show you guys this
Oh.
awesome painting that Tara painted while the
Whoa.
conversation was going on. She
that's
she painted
badass.
it live
tight.
in the moment while she was listening.
Whoa.
Very
Saturn
cool.
body with the railroad situation and some circular cosmological
circles, man.
situations.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if you like
That's
that,
tight.
go over to our Patreon. We got a bunch of stuff going on the website. I'm going to be posting
Nice.
some of her art, some of my art, and we might just do that every episode for the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. But that was like a practice run. And I think she did great. Looks cool. So
Yeah,
we'll
that's
see what
bad.
happens next.
I used to go to some reggae concerts, and they would have an artist right there on stage while they're doing while the reggae bands were playing, and they would make art right there on stage, and then they would I think they would sell it at the end of the show or something like that to people, or give it away or whatever
Right
they
on.
wanted to do. But yeah,
Thank you for
Alex
telling me
Gray
that. She would love to know
the
that.
Grays.
yeah, I think it's very cool to like have that like conceptual art of just to like make like an imprint of that actual time. It's kind of like a tattoo in a way for
Exactly.
me. Like that's how I think of tattoos. Like people are like, oh, why you want to get that on your body? What are you're worried about when you get old? And it's like, dude, it has a certain meaning to me in that period of my life, so I can never hate it. You
No
know,
regrets.
Right
Yeah.
on. Well, I just wanted to let the record show that I am over here on the East Coast, 1 a.m., stuck around till the end, no worries. But I am tired, and I know I'm not going to perform at my best when we have such deep questions to still get into. So my
Yes.
thought, though, was like, dudes, we got to do some kind of series where, because this stuff is so complex. You know, obviously you guys spent the whole month, and I love it. But I think like history in itself, like, and maybe this is already going on Roots of Creation, but either way, this has got me inspired, and I want to do something where
excellent.
we just take like pieces of history and take like a magnifying glass to them, because it's hard to give people a full picture on everything in, you know, a short amount of time like this.
For sure.
But if we like all prepare and hone in on one time period, I'm sure we can find a whole bunch of cool stuff.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool too that Matt at Great Deception was also doing like Old World November alongside of us doing this Tartaria November, and he was getting a lot deeper into star forts and you know, world's fairs and stuff like that, which is super cool to have other podcasters, you know, kind of on the same path as what you're doing.
Well, you guys gotta get that SEO up, because I was searching Tartaria on my podcast app, and I saw my podcast a bunch. Didn't see yours that much, so we got to look on that, get this podcast out in all the wavelengths.
Yeah, I know.
well-
I sent you that thing the other day, Dan, that was from our hoster, and it was like,
Yeah.
it was a little blog on how to boost our SEO.
Yeah. Well, get to it, dude.
That's a topic for
All right,
another
let me
day.
sign right on.
This has been so much
Pop
fun,
it onto
guys.
the cherry of things that I got to do all fucking
Yeah, one of the things that we were thinking about doing is just monthly like deep dives into certain subjects, and then having a bunch of different guests that month, like 4 guests that cover different aspects of that, and maybe we can get a little deeper and then do a smaller group show. This was a pretty large group show. I got a little carried away and overzealous. I need to tone it down to maybe like 5 to 6 people tops, I think.
I think anytime you go over 6, it definitely becomes a little bit of like more of a presentation and less of a conversation, because you're hearing everybody else and then you're thinking the whole time they're talking, and then you're like, okay, here's what I have. At least this is speaking for myself. Obviously everyone else left. So but either way, you know, I enjoy participating, but at the same time, in the effort of creating a streamlined conversation and podcast, my flavor or my taste goes to 4 to 5, like you guys just laid out. I think 4 or 5 tops is, and also, you know, given that you guys are gonna possibly do, you know, a new topic for December, you know, I want to freaking help out as much as I can. So let me know what the next topic is, and maybe I can help find some guests.
Yeah, I think we'll probably start it out in January. I'm gonna take like a 2-week break in December, so we're not gonna have a full month in December.
But the themes are fun. I like the themes. I like that.
Yeah, I like it too.
Makes it
man.
easier for booking, you know, when we're trying to like fucking like rack on who we're trying to get for booking. It's like, well, if we keep it to the themes, we can just do all. It's just a lot easier. So, and funner, and then round table at the end. So it's like consistent. People like consistency for some reason. It's like it's comfortable to them and it makes them feel good. They know what the fuck's going on in their life. So I don't know what that's all about.
I like that now that we're on just 4 of us, I can see that blob that was moving every now and then is actually a living dog. Before I was like, it's like, what is that, a pile of clothes that's moving behind Romy? And I'm like, no, it's a dog. Very cool.
Excellent, man.
This has been fun, guys. Always fun chopping it up with you and everybody else that was here and anyone listening. I guess we're live still on Joe's.
Yeah, we're still live.
Joe didn't turn his Zoom off. He just left. So that was very kind of him. So anyone who's still with us live, check me out, myfamilythinksimcrazy.com, and check out most of the people that were here. I think for the most part on altmediaunited.com, a podcast cooperative that I put together. I just added a new feature to the site so you can actually go from each individual podcast page to another. You'd think that would be obvious, but I didn't put that in. So now it's a lot easier to navigate the site is basically what I'm saying. So there's a lot of cool stuff on there. And then also, if you want to get every Alt Media United podcast downloaded in one click, just go to the page that says listen, copy the OPML code, and then put that in your podcast app, and you'll get every Alt Media United podcast, including Rising from the Ashes, including Roots of Creation, including the Deep Share, and a couple others that were here today too. So, and my podcast, Legit Bat, right on.
Yeah. Excellent, man. Thanks, Mark, again for joining us.
Yeah,
this was a long one. People out there that are still listening or will be listening in the future, we didn't get into the whole cymatics part of the conversation, the lost technology part, the missing time, and earth shape ideas, but it's okay. We can do it again, and I'm sure we've heard them all other places before, but I just wanted to try to get some more fluid answers on where's people's heads were at with Tartaria in whole, and see if we could really more define what Tartaria is, rather than having this chaotic subject of not knowing anything about the timeline, and seems everything seems really complicated to understand. So I just wanted to try to condense it and see if we could answer some of these questions in a very educated way, with different opinions from different people who might not agree with all aspects of things. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you very much for joining us. We're rising from the ashes. Roman, you got anything to say?
Oh, fuck yeah, we did it. Thank you, Mark, for sticking out. Like I said, the Tres Amigos here is rocking it out late night, baby. But yeah, man, I'm stoked on it. I'm stoked. It's great. And that's it, man. Let's do it. Let's do it. Oh, dude, he's sparking two.
All right.
He's sparking 2 blunts, bro.
3, man.
Hey.
3. One for
I
each of us.
smoked 3 blunts
One
in the
for all three
morning.
of us, and one for
Oh.
the 3 that I smoked during this 3-hour podcast. But let the record show I
Damn,
drank
my
a cup
fuel.
of coffee, a whole beer, and smoked 3 blunts, and I said a lot of intelligent things. So
Excellent.
maybe Dare wasn't
Kudos.
right about everything.
All right. Fire tribe, legit bat, fuck, whatever you're called.
Squad.
What do you call your people, Mark, now?
The lunatics.
The lunatics.
Yeah, because
The lunatics.
if you do the acronym, my family thinks I'm crazy, and then you put a moon in between MF and TIC, you get motherfucking lunatics, baby.
Oh, damn.
All right. Excellent. So thank you, lunatics. Thank you, deep sharers. Thank you, Michelle Gibson fans. Thank you, Deborah Gets Red Pilled fans. Thank you, Randy. And
Randy fans.
I don't
Randy
know
fans.
if I forgot anybody, but if you're not down with that, motherfuckers,
Ben
I got
fans.
2 words for you. Wake
Wake
up.
up.